Okay, I would like to welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council for Wednesday, March 15th, 2017. We're starting at 6:35 after addressing a couple of technical issues, but we're all ready to go at this point. So could I have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Chu?
Here.
Councilmember Way?
Here.
Councilmember Morrison?
Here.
Mayor Haroff?
Here.
And the record should record that Vice Mayor Hilmer is excused this evening.
So for those who are able, please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you and welcome to everyone who's here for this evening's meetings. We'll get started on our agenda with item number 2. We have a presentation from the Central Marin Police Authority, statistics for 2016. It does.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. One thing I just wanted to point out before we started is I was going to come here and introduce our Captain Hamid Khalili and Lieutenant Mike Legan, who put this together and worked really hard on it. In a little bit of good news, we identified a bank robber in Corte Madera and got an arrest warrant. We were going to go serve that in the East Bay tomorrow, and about 30 minutes ago, we got word that CHP just pulled him over and arrested him. So they had to run out, and they're going to go help with the search warrant in the East Bay tonight. So you have me.
Good. We're happy to have you.
All right.
They are more productively being utilized.
I would say so. So when emergencies happen, they run and do search warrants, and I do emergency PowerPoint. So we'll start off with some of the calls for service stats. We'll talk about all the jurisdictions, but I'll focus mainly on Larkspur because I'm assuming that interests you the most. Calls for service went up about 2,000 from last year. Calls for service can be anything from a traffic stop, going out with a citizen, doing some extra parking, and it could also be a 911 call. It could be a serious felony. It's pretty much everything. In terms of, do we have a pointer by any chance? Oh, that's okay. At the top, you can see our top two are the two biggest shopping centers in town, the Village at Corte Madera and Town Center, but that's followed at number 3 with Bon Air Shopping Center. So we had 721 calls for service there. Last year, Marin Country Mart, a little bit behind, but right there at 665. And you can see Redwood High School and Drake High School, I believe, came right under Cost Plus. We get called out a lot to our high schools, whether it be for speeding issues or drugs or mental health issues, or it could be parking, it can be lots of things. And then our top 5 calls for service, as you can see, traffic's our major problem in this town, and we give it a lot of attention. We have a traffic team that does a great job with that. We made 4,611 stops in all our jurisdictions last year, and that was aided with a traffic grant we received as well. That's followed by medical emergencies. We tend to get to the medical calls a little quicker than the fire department because we're not leaving from a station. So we tend to roll on almost all of those if they sound serious because doing CPR a minute or so earlier makes a big difference. This is just a quick breakdown of our calls for service. As you can see, we average about 107 calls per day or 4 calls per hour. Obviously, it's spread pretty evenly throughout the jurisdictions if you think about how many people live in each town. And as you can see that most of our calls happen during the daytime. And just like Marin County is a pretty sleepy county, there's not a lot of cars moving around. If you've ever been driving around at 2 or 3 in the morning, that's reflected in our calls for service as well. So Corte Madera is mostly around, all their slides are basically focused around the shopping center, Tamalpais, and 101. For such a small jurisdiction, we do have a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps to the freeway, and we are situated right between the Golden Gate Bridge and the Richmond Bridge. So we get a lot of traffic coming and going, and we make a lot of our stops out near the freeway. So Larkspur, these are for all your calls for service, and you can see our number 1 call for Larkspur was traffic stops. A lot is done around the high school and downtown, but also kind of an emerging trend. No surprise, if you look up to the far right, that yellow bubble is right around Marin Country Mart. Where we do our traffic enforcement is based on 3 things. One is, are we having accidents in that location? Number 2 is citizen complaints. And number 3 is just our officers driving around and realizing trends and going, that's really unsafe, this crosswalk. A lot of people are almost getting hit. I'm going to come out tomorrow and work that for a half hour, an hour, and see if I can help make a difference. So obviously, I think it's probably from about 1 o'clock on, the Larkspur Landing, that whole area, or Marin Country Mart, and Easter Francis Drake, it gets very congested. We have a lot of people running red lights, blocking intersections. We get a lot of complaints. So we did give that a lot of attention last year. San Anselmo, most of their heat maps are going to center around the downtown and the hub as well. No surprise. So reports, we took 2,681 reports last year. Reports are more than a call for service. That's where an officer actually, something rose to the level where the officer had to write, anywhere from a 3 to 8 page report. Usually it's felonies, but it can be other things too. As you can see, Larkspur, we actually had one of the largest volumes of reports in Larkspur last year, which is a little bit of an anomaly, and I'm not sure why, because these numbers did extract out a lot of the people who just came into our station. We classify those. If you're from San Anselmo and you walk into the Larkspur station, it's not a Larkspur report, it's actually a San Anselmo report. Nothing really exciting there with regards to that, but you can see we only average about 7 reports a day, but a lot of these things, from the time they go to the call till the time they have to write it, then it gets approved by a supervisor, then the records clerk approves it. It's even a simple report takes a couple hours of everyone's time. Report stats. One interesting thing, I think it was maybe on the media, I think it was definitely in the IJ, is our #1 spot for reports last year was a gas station in San Anselmo. Does anyone know why?
Where is it?
It's the gas and shop. It's right by the hub on Sir Francis Drake from the old Andronicos, kind of across the street. What happened is, I don't know if people are aware of this, but gas stations are a real frequent spot for identity theft. And usually they don't get a lot, but what they do is they buy a card skimming device on the internet, and then they go and they put it on the outside of the pump. And usually people discover it pretty quick. This one was pretty clever, and they actually went inside the pump to load the device, and it sat on there for weeks. So pretty much anyone who went there had their ATM and their PIN information stolen. So we took a ton of reports out there on that, and then later there's a lot of follow-up reports because people's whole identities got stolen too. Other than that though, if you wipe that off, for Larkspur, our big report locations, Bon Air Shopping Center, Marin Country Mart, Redwood High School, and the ferry terminal. This is kind of a no surprise, but it's all around commercial. Oh, this is Corte Madera, sorry. But yeah, for Corte Madera, it's around the shopping centers. They get a ton of auto break-ins because they're right by the freeway, and they also have a high incidence of, obviously, shoplifting. Commercial burglary, most of those aren't like someone sneaking in the middle of the night. It's them going into the store with the purpose of stealing, and it's legally a burglary. So for Larkspur, our #1 offense last year was auto burglaries, and that can be breaking a window or an unlocked car. It's still super prevalent in this county, and we kind of go up and down. I can tell you, last night in one little neighborhood in Corte Madera, they had 10 break-ins, which is really high. And most of those were window smashes, some unlocked cars. But a good example would be someone left, they have all their work files in there, and they just keep it in an old laptop bag because it's kind of like a briefcase. And it's just a bunch of paper. They don't think much of it. They left it on the passenger seat, woke up this morning, it was gone. The window was broken. I don't think the person was really looking for their files. They thought there was a computer in there. The other big one is mental commitment. And that's kind of big in all our jurisdictions, but especially since we border up to the psych emergency services in Marin General. A lot of times people get released, and unfortunately, they get put back on a hold within a day or two, or even sometimes a couple hours if we're alerted to a call.
Can I just ask a quick
Yeah,
question?
interrupt me anytime.
Yeah, no, just a clarification. On the auto break-ins,
Yes.
with the glass smash kind of grab stuff, are most of those cars parked on the street?
As opposed to like in a driveway?
In a driveway or somewhere else on the property?
Most are on the street, but if you were in a driveway right near the street, I would say it's probably just as likely. But if you had like a meandering driveway up, Summit, most of them, it's pretty rare that they're up in the hills, although Corte Madera was a little bit. The neighborhood is Chapman Park area. I don't know if you're aware of where that is. It's kind of across from and up the hill a little bit from the big park over there, Town Park. Most of our auto burglaries are in shopping centers or gyms. So it's the highest concentration. They actually happen a lot right in the middle of the day. So it could be Marin Country Mart. It could be Bonner Center. Ferry Terminal is a big one too. Yeah.
I just ask because there seems to be an increasing number in our Green Beret communities of people parking cars on the streets.
It's really throughout. It's countywide because I see the monthly stats, and sometimes it's really high, and an arrest gets made by either us or someone else in the county, and you see the stats go down nice and low, and then someone else comes in. We're constantly educating on it through our social media and community meetings, but it's really, you got to lock your door, and you got to leave everything, unfortunately, has to be secured. Even if it's an old Nordstrom bag full of used books. Oh, sorry, Dan. They're going to think it's full of clothes they can go return and get cash for.
And when they break a window, how do they keep it quiet?
It sounds more like, I've actually been on patrol and caught someone years ago. It sounds more like a pop. Mm-hmm. It's not like a Hollywood sound effect crash, like a sliding glass door breaking or something like that. But it's kind of that safety glass, and it just kind of pops, and then it's like a pop with some sprinkles is what it sounds like. So they tend to go up in the winter, even though last night was a quiet summer night, which is kind of rare. But we get a lot of these when the storms come in because no one's going to hear glass breaking at all. Yeah.
So can I ask
please.
a question? On the identity theft one, is that mostly from people who report an online identity theft, or like what happened to me when someone stole our mail?
Are you talking about the gas station or just in general?
No, just in general, you have the identity theft. Is that classified as?
It's everything. Yeah, it's really everything. It can be someone filed your tax returns in their name and got a refund. It can be a common one is like, and I've been a victim of it myself, and someone basically just took my identity, had a fake driver's license, put their photo on it, and opened like 10 accounts down in Los Angeles. Yeah. And we think it was happened when I was refinancing a house. I mean, it probably, how all your info just gets shot out to like 20 places.
Right.
It's really hard to track it.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then second, where do we do the overlap with CHPs? So for an example, today I saw what appeared to be a car crashed at Madera, evidence of a car crash at the Madera exit in front of the Chevron station.
Yeah, that's been there for a couple of days.
So it probably was a CHP chase, but then they crashed, it looks like, on Corte Madera property.
I believe that's it's kind of an on-ramp island. So that would be CHP's jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yeah, CHP has the highways, but they also have unincorporated roads. So they do the traffic enforcement anywhere the sheriff has jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So we do have some weird spots. Like we have East Sir Francis Drake up until Windsurfers Point, just prior to the prison. But then when you go under the interchange and you get to the first gas station, the Shell station, it actually switches to CHP until you get out into San Anselmo. I mean, it's all over the place. Yeah. Huh. So we try to work together a lot on when we're having traffic issues in areas that affect us both.
Okay. Thanks for those responses.
Sure. San Anselmo, I'll just click through that in case someone's interested with that. Traffic stops. You can see that Larkspur, we had, I want to say our traffic stops went up anywhere from 500 to 1,000 last year. We really had a lot, and a lot of that was the grant, and we really did put a lot of emphasis on Larkspur last year because the big change was that East Sir Francis Drake just got out of control, and we spent a lot of time out there. I'm not sure if it helped much, but we didn't have too many accidents. But we did do a lot of stops there, and we did a lot of stops around Redwood High School as well, because we get constant reports of speeding during lunch breaks and parents dropping kids off. And that also includes traffic stops for like a click it or ticket or hands-free when we do operations like that. Corte Madera, skip over that. So Larkspur, as you can see the heat maps, once again, our traffic stops are in those two spots. We also have a lot by Cost Plus Plaza, and a lot of that is late at night. There's not many cars driving around, and we try and, if there's anyone bad, coming into town to commit crime, they're generally going to come off the freeways, so we pay attention to who's coming off the freeways into town. And a lot of the stops get made right around that interchange area. Oh, I almost double-clicked it. So we also do parking enforcement in Larkspur, and mainly that's the downtown area and the lots here, and that's based on complaints we received from people. It's also, Redwood High School sometimes calls us to do parking issues out there, or in Riviera, in the neighborhood right there where high school kids park. You can see half of all our citations were, and parking-wise, we did over 3,000 in San Anselmo, and that's just an expectation that town has. They have parking issues like Larkspur, but it's almost amplified over there. I'm not sure why. It's a little bit bigger downtown, perhaps. But we did do a lot of parking enforcement in Larkspur, and we did the highest number of traffic citations and traffic stops in Larkspur as well. So you can see the moving and parking citations was about 50-50 in Larkspur, about 51% parking and 50% moving. Those are our top 5 locations for where citations were issued, and once again, just kind of reiterates what we've been talking about. San Anselmo, 83% of the citations that were issued was parking. They also have an ordinance in their town, unlike Corte Madera and Larkspur, where they don't allow cars to park on the street overnight. Obviously, there's thousands of cars violating this every night, but we do go to at least 2 streets and work that whole street twice a year. Traffic collisions, we get asked about that a lot. It's kind of spread evenly among the towns. Our average is about the same as last year, 2 collisions a day. Even though those numbers seem high, those aren't all horrific collisions. A lot of those are just backing up in a shopping center and dinging a door or something like that. And for Larkspur, just follows our traffic survey. We do have a lot of collisions around Bon Air Center, once again, the parking lot. But as we talked about, where we have accidents is where we try and do our traffic enforcement. And people will still, when we get complaints, go work different streets, but when we have time, that's where we're focusing, because the whole goal of doing traffic enforcement is to prevent accidents. And with that, that is the end of the slides. Does anyone have any other questions?
Any questions from the council?
Nice job.
Yes, thank you.
All right,
We always enjoy hearing that report every year, so thanks very much. Is this
you're
your
welcome.
first time doing this? I think.
No, I did it last year as a captain.
did
It's
it?
usually a captain-lieutenant job.
Oh, okay.
So
Well-
they're going to have to owe me lunch.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You did a great job, as always. Thanks very much for doing that. Do we have another item for presentation?
We do. Julian, you want to introduce?
Actually, I'm going to come over there because I need to do this.
Okay. You can use this.
Good evening. This evening we have a presentation from the Serenity Apartments group. Okay. And so the group approached us last year with a proposal to do some improvements at Neighborhood Park. This is similar to what they had done a few years ago, where they made improvements to a playground in that same park, and so they came back again. And we're interested in doing some other improvements under a similar
You need to make sure you're speaking into
Dan.
the
Okay.
mic.
He's working on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'd like to ask the Serenity group to come up and introduce themselves and their architect while I'm loading your presentation.
Good evening.
Just let us know your name, please, for
Okay.
the record.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Travis Torse. I'm with Maximus Real Estate Partners.
Great, thanks, Travis.
No problem. Just to kind of give a little background and some history of this project, as Julian was saying, back in December of 2015, Maximus completed their donation of a children's playground, which is located on the neighborhood park. near the main entrance off of Larkspur Landing Street. Since then, Maximus has approached Steve Kikuchi and his design group to come up with a design and improvement package of donations to the city park, the neighborhood park. From there, these donations will be presented by Steve Kikuchi, and I will let him go ahead
Thank you.
and take it away.
Good evening. I'm Steve Kikuchi, landscape architect. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the location of the neighborhood park, it is located on the east side of 101, across from Larkspur Ferry, and adjacent to the Larkspur Landing Shopping Center and the Courtyard Hotel. And as I can point out here from this picture here, this is basically the Serenity Apartments, and here in the middle of the apartments is the neighborhood park. And here's a more of a close-up of the park facility. Here is the playground that was built a few years ago, and the actual limits of the park are almost within this entire lawn area here. So all of these surrounding areas are the Serenity Apartments, and the park is basically in the middle of that location. Oops. The lawn area is basically just a wide open lawn area. As you can see from here, very spacious open lawn area. And then,
There's a bit of a lag, you gotta give it a sec.
okay. Then here's a photo of the park playground that was done a few years ago. On the opposite side of the park, as part of the apartment project, there is actually a pond with a waterfall. There are certain issues occurring right now, especially during this past rainy season. There was some puddling within the lawn areas that kind of creeps onto the pathway, the main pathway that runs through the park. And here's our plan that we developed within the park area. This is the entire park area here. We are proposing, amongst many other things, a outdoor fitness gym location here. Adjacent to that, we have some bicycle racks. We have 3 picnic areas that we're also adding here. Picnic area here, a picnic area here, and then one over by the playground area. 2 of the picnic areas will have some trees added to provide some shade on hot days. And then in this area right here, we're proposing a fenced-in dog area. It'll only be a 4-foot-high metal fence, and it's an area that's about 110 feet by 30 feet at its widest point, where people can put dogs to contain them. Also, in conjunction with that, we have a small little area here where we're going to provide a little dog wash area so people can wash their dogs' feet if need be. There are currently now existing some wooden exercise equipment that the city put in, one over here and one over here. We propose to remove those. There are also benches out there that will be retained. Here's a picture of what the exercise gym will look like. It's a 10-station metal gymnasium with different types of activities, climbing ropes, pull-up bars, net climbing, a lot of different activities for adults mostly. And it will be on a rubberized surface for safety reasons. oops, we are proposing tables and benches for the picnic areas. So we do have these benches and tables in 3 locations. And also barbecues at each of these stations. These are city standard barbecues. Some of the shade trees that we will be putting in are called London plane trees, which are deciduous trees, so they'll provide sunlight during the winter and shade during the summer. And then the dog area will actually have an artificial synthetic lawn. So it'll be a lower maintenance, there won't be any mud, and it'll be a durable synthetic turf made specially for dog areas. Also, fencing, the fencing that we will install will be similar to what was installed around the playground, which is a metal picket fence. The bike rack will be a contemporary style rack. And then for the main path that cuts through the park, we are proposing a new type of interlocking paver material. It'll kind of upgrade, we can help resolve some of those drainage problems that we had showed you previously. So this paving material will be a new feature on the main, it's about an 8-foot wide path. So once again, that pathway will be from here to here, will be the new paving. We are also adding a new concrete path from here to here so that there is a continuous loop to the dog area. And that's it.
That's great. And any questions from the council?
Sure. I have just to clarify. I love the design, and last year I was lucky enough to cut the ribbon on the playground, and really appreciated the donation Serenity did for that. Looks like a $152,000 donation to the city, which is really spectacular. Thank you very much for that, coming up with that design. It's all wheelchair accessible, I presume, with the walkway and the access to it?
Yes, it is.
And then, Julian, just to clarify, so this came to the city in September, and then the Park and Rec approved it, so we've already gone through all those pieces of public process. That's terrific, too. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, it's just gonna be beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Very impressive.
I think the improvements that you guys have made, including the playground, is what you're proposing now are terrific, a great contribution to our community, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we'll go on to item number 3, public comment. The city council will hear public comments only on matters over which they have jurisdiction. There will be no council discussion. I will allot no more than 3 minutes to any individual unless the council determines otherwise. The total amount of time allocated to this agenda item will be 15 minutes. Do we have any members of the public who would like to take advantage of this opportunity to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, which is approval of the consent calendar. The purpose of the consent calendar is to group items that may be approved routinely. Anyone may request removal of an item for discussion, and I'll invite first the council if there are any items that they wish to remove.
No.
Are there any members of the public that would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll go ahead and make that motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Item number 5 is the city manager's oral report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I probably sound like a broken record, but there is rain forecast for next week.
Oh, no.
So
Oh, yes.
once again, I want to remind everybody, the more you can check your property, and if you're not comfortable doing it, bringing in somebody to look at your trees, make sure they're stable, look at if you have slopes, if you're concerned at all about slides, having a technical expert look at your property. Do it this week before the rain comes, because we've had a little opportunity to dry out, but as some folks may have read about or heard about, a week after it stopped raining, Fairfax had a mudslide. So these things do happen, and we really encourage folks to be safe and keep an eye on their property and do their due diligence. Right now on the Marin IJ's website, I assume that means it'll be in the print tomorrow, is an article about the SMART board meeting that occurred earlier today. Vice Mayor Hilmer was in attendance, although he couldn't be here for this meeting. He was in attendance. I'm pleased to report that there has been a compromise and a plan for an interim transit center in San Rafael. That's gotten some press lately. I want to thank Congressman Huffman, who invited Vice Mayor Hilmer and myself to attend some meetings that were occurring to try to talk about that compromise. We went as more extra parties because this is at its core a San Rafael SMART and bus transit operator issue. But based on this article, it sounds like significant progress has occurred since the meeting I attended, which was on March 3rd. So that's very exciting, and it's a good step forward to try to avoid some of the issues that you probably read about in the IJ that San Rafael is concerned about the effect of the train in their community. There was an editorial about the fire consolidation work that's going on between Larkspur and Corte Madera the other day in the Marin IJ. It encouraged us to make sure that we inform the public. I just wanted to briefly make sure the public and the council's aware. I know the council, I've spoken to you already a few times about this. We have launched the public engagement part of this process, and the first meeting was sort of an outline of where we are and the many steps that are left before any vote will take place. And so there is a lot of data coming, a lot of opportunity for the public to look at what we're trying to accomplish in terms of economies of scale, improvement of service, and what the costs will look like. And that was the focus of the editorial. I just want to assure the council we completely agree, and we are fully committed. And your committee members, in this case, Councilmembers Chu and Wei, have been very clear with staff that they want a full public process, as has their counterparts in Corte Madera. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And then, as you know, we've been dealing with the significant filming event that's been occurring in Larkspur the past year in the Heather Gardens neighborhood. The filming of a television show called 13 Reasons Why, based on a book of the same name. The folks who produced that reached out to Larkspur through the library and offered to have the author of 13 Reasons Why come to Larkspur to do a presentation about the book and the topics therein. It's a very challenging book about teen suicide. And so it's actually occurring on April 5th at 2:30 in the afternoon at the Hall Middle School gym. And I'm pleased to report our library, thank you, Janice Ackel is here, have been working with their counterparts at both Redwood High School and at Hall Middle School to try to make this an event the kids can attend. You know, anyone who has a child in the tween and teen age group knows this book has resonated quite a bit in that age group. And so it's a great opportunity for them to engage an author directly in a book. And we appreciate this gesture. Filming is certainly hard on a community in some ways, although I think they worked diligently to make it as little impact as possible. And the show will be on March 31st. It's a Netflix show, so you have to have a subscription, but we all sort of look forward to seeing the bits and pieces of Larkspur that are portrayed in the show. It's not taking place in Larkspur, but we'll all know it's Larkspur.
Is it just that one night, or is it?
Well, this is one of those things where they drop all the episodes at once, and then you get to watch them at your own pace. So, so we're looking forward to that. But thank you to the library for arranging this event, and I know they're doing a lot with the schools, particularly to get the word out. And then lastly, I'm not going to speak much to this because I suspect some of you are going to speak to this, but I want, from my standpoint as city manager, just thank the Larkspur Community Foundation. We co-sponsored a volunteer appreciation event called the Heart of Larkspur that I think you'll speak about. I get the easy job. I just have to authorize a check to help pay for the event and then make sure I'm not late to the event. So those are two things I managed to accomplish. But they did a great job. And we get a lot of credit for co-hosting, but the folks at the foundation do all the heavy lifting there. So really want to extend a thank you to them, and I'll let the folks at the dais speak more about that if they want. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm done with my report.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think we'll go on to council member reports and comments, and I invite any of us who are attending that great volunteer event to provide their insights. Anna, you were there.
I was.
Larry, you were there as well.
I
So
was just
please.
complimenting our mayor. He did a great job as MC, and everyone seemed quite relaxed and happy to be there and appreciating our community effort to make Larkspur as special as it is. What would you say, Larry?
Yeah, it was a really nice event because it gave actually the Larkspur Community Foundation Board, recognizing the work of all the people who do volunteer work within the community. So they had their own people that they, who are doing work for them, but they also invited, other civic groups and people who, live in and around Larkspur to come and celebrate this event.
And we have a lot of volunteers. It was quite a nice turnout.
Volunteers. So anything further specific you want to report on?
I do. I
Councilmember
just have
Morrison?
one
Please.
item. I sit on the Marin Women's Commission, and I am chairing the Marin Teen Girls Conference. It's for teens from 8th grade all the way to seniors, and we have over 16 workshops by professional women. We have these teen ambassadors who attend all the schools in Marin County, and they're the ones that suggested the workshops that want to be held. It's $20 for the day. It's held at the Embassy Suites. It's March the 26th. It includes breakfast and lunch and a goodie bag. The girls we hope we have 300 teens that show up. They get to choose 3 out of the 16 workshops. Just examples, we have Body Positive, Like Who You Are You Ready for College panel. We have Coping with Others' Expectations, Money Management, and 14 other workshops. So it's going to hopefully be as successful as we assume it will be. So thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Chu?
I don't have anything, but you were at a meeting we were both at. I'll let you report out on it.
Well, there's a couple of them. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you can
Last
just
night,
kind of
I was gonna talk
chime
about
in,
it.
so if you
That's
want to
fine.
talk about that, that's
I'll be
fine.
happy to do that. Okay. Councilmember, nothing for you? Okay. Well, this has been a busy month. We've already talked about a couple of things, so I won't go in any particular order on the things that I've had an opportunity to attend. But I was very pleased to hear our city manager's report about progress that has been made in the discussions about SMART and the transit issues that have been presenting challenges to the city of Santa Fe. And I'm looking forward to hearing a more detailed report about what the outcome of those discussions are, because they do affect not only the folks who live in Santa Fe, but they affect many of our constituents as well, and it's important for us all to be engaged in those discussions. So I was very pleased to attend the meeting at the Santa Fe City Hall on March 8th. Didn't say anything. Councilmember Hilmer was there as well, but we had many members of our communities, both in Larkspur and Santa Fe, who expressed concerns about the status of those discussions, and I think it's important for us to be making collective progress in resolving some of those concerns. So again, not in any particular order. On March 3rd, I attended an early morning meeting at the Civic Center with representatives of both county staff, and various members of this little community or committee that we have to talk about sea level rise within our community and the development of a vulnerability, I always stumble on that word, a vulnerability assessment that is in the works currently by the county. A fair amount of work has been done on that, and we should be seeing here in another month or two a draft of that assessment that will be made available to the public. It's a challenging exercise. In my view, one of the most challenging things that we face as a community, not just here locally, but throughout the West Coast, are the challenges presented by climate change. And there will be some real challenges that we will face here in our community, in Larkspur, Corte Madera, Novato, Sausalito. This vulnerability assessment is an opportunity for all of us to take a hard look at a range of different scenarios that we may face over the next 10, 20, 50 years, and provide a basis for us to make an assessment about adaptations and other changes that we may want to make in the way in which we live our lives here in Marin County. So I think it's a very important exercise. I'm glad to be a part of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing the report that comes out. On March 7th, Ann and I attended a joint meeting of the Library and Parks and Recreations Board, where we didn't say much ourselves, but we heard a lot from both of those boards, creating some statements and expectations about directions that they would like to see our community take in moving forward with the community facility parcel. It was a very instructive meeting, and we're looking forward to having an ongoing dialogue with members of both of those boards and with our community at large. That's an important priority for us to sort out, and I think we'll be having some further discussion on some of those issues during the course of the evening. On March 11th, I attended a meeting in Corte Madera with various representatives of our local Marin community, particularly in connection with ABAG, concerning the proposed merger of MTC and ABAG and the processes that both of those entities are going through. It's a complicated process, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about how everything's going to look as that process moves forward. The focus of our meeting that day was really on working through some contractual arrangements and providing comments to both MTC and ABAG on ways in which certain staffing services can be provided by MTC to ABAG, with the goal of preserving the integrity of ABAG within that overall organization. There is still a big discussion that needs to occur about how the consolidated entity, if it in fact is technically consolidated, will look in the future. So this is kind of the beginning of that discussion, but it's a complicated discussion, and it's an important one for us as a member of ABAG to make sure that we engage fully in, to make sure that our interests in that organization are adequately represented. There will be on May 20th, speaking of ABAG, a meeting at the Mill Valley Community Center to talk about the next iteration of Plan Bay Area. They've done this before. They conduct workshops where they've made presentations about their different proposals for the way in which Plan Bay Area may look going forward into the future. I think there are 3 potential scenarios that will be presented at that meeting. It's a public meeting. And for those of you who are interested in engaging in this process, which will have a potentially profound influence about the way in which development and transit issues are addressed in our larger regional community over time, I encourage you to put that down on your calendar and attend.
Haven't you said May 20th? I thought is it March 20th?
I thought it was May 20th.
I thought okay, I thought that was the General Assembly Day, but we'll figure it out.
I
the
may
dates.
have that confused, and we can correct that
Okay.
if we need. But I looked at my notes, and I had May 20th. So, but we'll fix that if we need to. And then finally, and this is what Councilmember Chu was alluding to, we both attended a meeting last night, which was actually a very good meeting, I thought. It was a meeting over at Basic Elementary School to discuss the proposal of GSA 16 and the Green Bay Property Owners Association to move forward with a special tax increase that affects folks exclusively living within the Green Bay community in order to provide enhanced landscaping and maintenance services for common areas, some of the median strips and other areas that are important to all of us who live in Green Bay. It's strictly limited to Green Bay, but it is a subject of some concern within that community because the proposal is to take a tax that has been imposed on a per parcel basis in the past of $150 and increase it to $300. So it's a 100% increase. So that will be subject to a special mail-in ballot, which will be issued in early April. I believe that's what they mentioned. with the mail-in ballots due to be submitted back to the county by May 4th. So those of you who live in Greenbrae, value the quality of our life there and the beautiful landscaping that we take advantage of in that community, I encourage folks to pay attention to that and vote. So, Councilmember Chu, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we pointed out last night, though, is if you place the increase in context of it being 100%, they haven't raised it since 1993. And if you look at the consumer price index for the San Francisco Bay Area over that time, it had a 1.82 multiple, so it's equivalent to about $275. So it's not all that far off when you consider that, price inflation adjusted, that it's in the right ballpark.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is a challenge in terms of the way in which they're making the presentation, because if you just look at it, it looks like a 100% increase. And there are reasons why they are doing that. They have to do in part with the way in which the county has kind of constrained their ability to move forward with increases in the assessments that have been made over time. And everyone is just kind of catching up in the last couple of years, and that's really the reason for this proposal. But again, for those who live in Greenbrae and are concerned about that, there's a lot of information that is available on the CSA 16 website on the county's webpage. So I encourage you to take a look at that to get some background details, get an understanding for the specific proposals that are being made for maintenance and improvements as part of that project.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the portion of Greenbrae also that's on the north side of Sir Francis Drake down to like Manor Road. So it's not the portion where, the shopping center and
Right.
and the office buildings are.
Right, and there will be some challenges because of the Sir Francis Drake Rehabilitation Project in terms of their ability to do some landscaping improvements along Sir Francis Drake. In particular, of concern to me, since I live on La Cuesta, the kind of main entrance within Greenbrae, which is very lovely. Improvements there will have to be deferred until progress can be made on the Sir Francis Drake Rehabilitation Project. So, but it's important for them to move forward with this proposal, and as I said, I encourage everyone to take a hard look at it and vote as you feel appropriate. That's all I had. So with that, let's move on to agenda item number 7, public hearings, and I think we have one item on that, item 7.1, amending the fee schedule to the city of Larkspur, and I look forward to staff's presentation on that item.
Give me one sec, Terry. Before Terry speaks, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to let you know, so having this fee study done, I think has been in my budget message to the council for about 3-4 years. As the council knows, I end up sort of having to triage the wish list of to-dos on that, and the fee study has slipped several times. And now that we have it done, and you're going to hear about it tonight, I'm kicking myself that I triaged it down the list because it was long overdue. I'm very appreciative of Finance Director Kathy Orm and Terry Madsen, who you're going to hear from, for the work that was done. This is going to, I think, be one of those things that the public won't see the ramifications so clearly, but for how we do business, very, very helpful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Madsen from ClearSource.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for allowing me to speak with you this evening. As the City Manager mentioned, my name is Terry Madsen. I'm here from ClearSource Financial Consulting, and our firm helps communities throughout the state identify and recover the costs of providing fee-related services. As we wrap up the study and provide you with a proposed fee schedule for adoption this evening, I wanted to take a few moments to provide an overview of the study and the study in general, and then items that are particularly significant for you to consider. So the first part of my presentation, I'd like to just discuss some conceptual issues that influence the study to make sure we're speaking the same language. User fees are collected by communities to offset the cost of providing services. And what we think of, communities primarily collect fees when there is a specific service being provided either at the request of or on behalf of a person, a business, an entity, instead of services that we're providing to the community as a whole. So when we think of services provided to the community as a whole, we would think of patrol services, public safety services, public works, community services. We use primarily community-wide resources in the form of general taxes to fund those services. And so when we find a specific service that we're providing, we frequently try and find a specific revenue source to cover that cost of that service. Throughout the presentation, you'll hear me referencing this phrase, cost of service. And it is sort of our legal mandate. The cost of service is the legal ceiling that we are allowed to recover for providing services. And what we think of as cost of service is a pool of labor costs, service and supplies costs, overhead costs, and those costs can be pooled, they can be aggregated and identified to services, and then even broken further into an hourly rate for service. And if we know an hourly rate for service and we know an estimated time of providing a specific service, then we can say, well, the estimated cost of providing that service is X. So if we knew our hourly rate for service was $150 and a service took 1 hour to perform, we'd say the cost of that service is $150. If it took 2 hours to perform, it'd be $300. I think this slide is particularly relevant because what it shows is the maximum level of recovery for the fees we're considering is 100% of the full cost of service. We're not allowed to make a profit. But what's particularly relevant is you don't have to recover the full cost of service, but if you elect not to recover the full cost of service, what you're saying is the cost of service still exists, it's just being funded from some other source other than fee payers. So our floor is full funding from some other source other than fee payers. What we would say is partial cost recovery is some's coming from fee payers and some's coming from general fund revenues. Now, to focus on this particular study, the goals for this study were to identify the cost of service, to consider modifications to fee categories, to provide you with an estimated revenue impact of any proposed changes, to help plan for ongoing maintenance of these fees. As the city manager mentioned, this has been on the list for a while. We want to set up a proactive management plan and then ultimately to deliver findings for your consideration via an updated fee schedule. So the fees we examine, for illustrative purposes, we can break them into 4 primary categories: building fees, planning fees, encroachment and land development engineering fees like public works type stuff, and recreation fees. And I want to focus on the far left category and the far right category for a moment. So the majority of your fee revenue comes in the form of building permit fees. And what we see is current fee revenue recovers almost the full cost of service. So we're recommending just a minor increase to get you to full cost of service. And that is consistent with industry standards. So most communities are seeking to recover the full cost of service for development-related fees because of that clear nexus between a specific action happening, a very specific benefit being provided to the person receiving service or to the entity receiving service. So not much change on the building side. The other primary source of your revenue comes in the form of recreation fees. And your recreation fees in aggregate recover roughly half of the cost of service. And what we're recommending here is just a regional cost inflation. The Director Whitley and his team periodically review fees. They look at use targets, they look at changes in facility, regional comparisons, and they recommend fee changes on a case-by-case basis as something new comes online or we move to artificial surfaces or something of that nature. So the fees aren't proposed to change by more than the change in the consumer price index for this year. But what I'll mention here is even though there is less than full cost recovery, that is also consistent with industry practices. So where you see building being a full cost recovery target, we rarely see a recreation program saying, I recover my full cost of service from fees because of this community benefit or community goals and values where we might say for specific populations, what we desire is participation rather than fee recovery, let's say. So it's tough to compare apples to every community to each other, but the industry statistics that we see is if you're over 30% cost recovery, you're better than the average community in the state. So the cost recovery levels felt healthy to us in the sense of if the community's happy with them, there wasn't some significant trend of you are some outlier to the low side. I'm going to end my presentation by focusing on the two middle because that's where the most significant changes are proposed in the planning fee side and the encroachment and land development engineering fees. So what you see here is, I'll start with current planning. On the planning fees, we have about 50% cost recovery today, and we're proposing that fees would move to close to 75% cost recovery with a long-term goal of maybe more than 75% cost recovery, but via a phase-in pattern. The same thing with encroachment permits, but the slide is a little misleading on encroachments. For the major projects, we are targeting 100% cost recovery for encroachments or grading permits or land development engineering. But for some minor projects, like a residential driveway or something like that, there is less than full cost recovery targeted. But in aggregate, you'd be close to full cost recovery for encroachments. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about planning fees. So most of your planning fees are billed hourly. The city takes in a deposit and says, we will track our time, we'll charge against the deposit based on an hourly rate for service. If there's money left over at the end, we'll refund you. If the project takes more than that initial deposit, we'll ask you to replenish the deposit. Those hourly rates that we're using are lower than our cost of providing services, and so that's really what we're recommending be shifted is that underlying hourly rate. And a common hourly rate that's being used today depends on the position who's charging. You know, it might be a senior planner or an assistant planner or whatever, but a common rate might be $103, and we're recommending that move to $145. What we saw is the full cost would be $194, and that also is not a regional outlier. So a full cost of $194 is consistent with what we'd expect from a cost of service study. But what I wanted to provide you with was a picture of what that movement means. If we moved from $103 to $145 generally, you would still be in the range of what other regional communities are charging on an hourly rate for services. You would even be to the low end of middle, but you'd be moving yourself more towards that middle range. So the same way the mayor and Councilmember Chu were talking about that 100% increase feeling significant on a special tax, it might feel significant to move from 103 to 145, but you're really moving yourself into the range of what development community is probably expecting to see anyway. The other
change. Can I just
change.
ask a quick question on that last
Yes.
last side? When you're when you've got a on your bar chart for just Marin County,
Yes.
is that Marin County? That's not all of Marin County, including both the incorporated and unincorporated areas.
Only unincorporated Marin County.
Okay, so the only.
So you got Mill Valley there.
But that's the only Marin County incorporated entity.
Yeah, there's some that they don't publish their hourly. So we look at fee schedule and say, is your hourly rate published? So we might check Town of Tiburon, but they say this is the fee for service, this is the fee for service. It's a fixed fee, and there's not an hourly rate published in the fee schedule. This is where we saw published rates.
Just Mill Valley.
If you looked at their fee schedules, yes. Mill Valley, it does. So every single community has their planning fee schedule. but it says a conditional use permit costs you $5,000, a sign permit costs you $400. It doesn't say my hourly rate for planning service is $172.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Another change being proposed is a movement of the appeal fee. And my understanding from talking with staff is that you do an excellent job of trying to avoid appeals, trying to work with the community and say, let's figure out if we can solve this problem before we get to the appeal stage. But when appeals do happen, even though they're rare, there's a significant cost to dealing with those, in the thousands and thousands of dollars, right, by the time you bring attorneys in and everything like that. So you're at the low end of the regional spectrum when we look around, and we're proposing to move you into the middle range of $750 to $1,000 for an appeal. And as a editorial comment, what I'm seeing, the trend in the Bay Area is actually moving towards almost full cost recovery for appeals. So if we came back in 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the $1,000 ends up at the low end of the spectrum because of communities saying, hey man, the cost and effort is very significant and we've already delivered an initial finding. So that's a proposed change.
So with the increase, where would Larkspur be located, between where?
So Larkspur is the dark blue bars. I don't know if you can see it from that angle.
Thank you.
The dark blue bars, and the reason you see 2 bars is because there'd be a fee for an applicant-initiated appeal and a fee for a non-applicant-initiated appeal, with the idea the applicant-initiated would be slightly higher because they've already had findings made linked to the project, where a non-applicant maybe hasn't had the opportunity to understand those findings. But, and that's also consistent. South Salito has non-applicant versus applicant. San Rafael has non-applicant versus applicant fees. So we're just trying to move into it's still minor cost recovery, but one purpose of fees actually is to modify behaviors, right? So we cannot recover more than our cost of service, but we don't necessarily have to encourage frivolous appeal. We want people to know this is a significant undertaking. There are significant costs to the city. We want it to be taken seriously when we do this. And so this just moves us more into the range.
Yeah, and I think we'll have some questions about that strategy when we get to that part.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
For encroachment permit and land development engineering fees, most fees today are using that same methodology as planning, where every project, there's just a variable fee charged. How many hours did I take here? How many hours did I take here? But for a lot of these projects, they're fairly homogeneous in nature, and so communities can use flat fees. They can just say, hey, the 6 or 7 out of 10 times, the project is going to take me 2 hours or 2.5 hours, so I'm going to bill you for 2.5 hours. That's what my fee is going to be based on. We're proposing more use of flat fees that will help applicants anticipate what they're going to pay, know what they're going to pay, and it will help with revenue forecasting. I mentioned there is some less than full cost recovery targeted for some minor encroachment permit categories. That's intended to encourage compliance and to help fees stay within a regional average. But for the more significant projects where we're doing excavation or grading or major traffic control, multi-day traffic control, we recommend full cost recovery. From a fiscal impact, this isn't super significant in terms of the items that you have to consider as part of an annual budget, but what it is, again, is proactive management of fees and saying I'm making deliberate choices about fee recovery and the ongoing management of those fees so that I don't stay static. I encourage generational equity year after year. Each generation is paying close to their fair share, and we're moving in a logical pattern instead of staying static and then peaking, staying static and then peaking. So we anticipate less than $100,000 of annual impact. The majority of that would be on the planning side because that's where the shift is in the hourly rates. my final slide is just a final overview that says these fees are set at your direction at the conclusion of a public hearing. We developed them. We recommended the recommended changes are intended to align to feedback we received from staff and then ultimately community goals. We talked about the proactive pattern of fee management and the benefits of consistently evaluating and recalibrating fees. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Well, thank you. That was a terrific presentation. It's very, very helpful, and I want to express appreciation to our city manager for pushing this process forward, because I think it's very important. Are there any other presentations from staff on this one, or can we bring it back to the council?
You can bring it back to council. We have the various departments that contributed represented, so questions specific to department or procedures or activity, we can support Terry in responding.
Okay, terrific. So let's bring it back to the council for some for any questions. Councilmember Chu, Councilmember White.
Thank you for that presentation and a very comprehensive report. Of course, Kathy Orm's financial reports have been very detailed, so I really appreciate it. I had a question about the recreation fees.
Yes.
Now, I mean, I understand the philosophical nature of encouraging community participation, and I think that's something that is commendable and probably referenced in many other communities. One thing I was interested in is, did you do a comparison of adjoining jurisdictions and their fee schedule? So on page 11, under the appeals, you provided comparisons with Mill Valley and other things under that category. Is it possible to do that for recreation, or is that the nuances are so different?
It's possible, and we could have it for you very quickly. If I'm speaking anecdotally here, but I recall looking at them, and I felt like you were, and Director Whitley might be able to chime in on this too if he knows, but I felt like the field rental fees were at the higher end of the region, if I remember right, in the $40-something per hour range. So I can go back to confirm it for you and follow up with you, but the bottom line is I felt like our initial look confirmed what we saw here, where recovery was at the higher end of the scale, of the regional scale, and that's what brings you into these higher cost recovery levels than a lot of communities see.
Okay.
But we could pick a few categories and go find specific comparisons. It is challenging with rec fees because they say this is a softball field rental, but it might be grass versus artificial turf, or include lights and no lights, those kind of things. But
no, I understand
you
that.
can get in the ballpark.
Right, ballpark, that's a good use. No, I understand the difference because they are not comparing, one encroachment of 30 feet versus another encroachment.
Right.
So, but I'm pleased to hear, though, that you did have an opportunity to really assess. I want to make sure that we are hopefully within the range of what our neighboring jurisdictions are charging for recreational activities. And I know our Park and Rec director has been paying a lot of attention to that. I just want to make sure that that was incorporated into here. Because it sounded like we are about 30%, most jurisdictions have about 30%. The term you had used was 30% recovery at those.
So, yeah,
and we're at 48?
40, I saw 49,
43.
and what we saw, I think it's a nationwide average, but 35% is the last from the Parks and Rec International Commission or something. Like, how you have a committee
right.
or a board, trade organization. I think 35% is the last sort of nationwide recovery target I saw.
And in your experience, how often are fee schedules revised? Is it every 3 or 4 years, or?
So what we instruct our clients, and when I answer that question, what I say is, what we're seeing now in the last several years, really since 2010, 2011, when we saw this economic downturn, is that communities are saying we have to be proactively managing every revenue source, not just counting on sales tax revenue or property tax revenues go up. So what we're seeing now is annual recalibration of fees by some sort of regional cost index, and then completing a study like this as your organization changes. So maybe you do like an departmental restructuring or something like that. You might want to complete one of these studies, or every 3 to 5 years. You don't, There is no mandated time,
Okay.
but what we say is recently, and I don't know if that will continue, but recently, the primary driver of these fees is labor costs. And because we're in the public sector and we're dealing with the pension system, public employee costs have been rising faster than regional cost inflation. So regional cost inflation gets us closer to our end target, but it's good to look at least every once in a while, especially if you're having more demands from CalPERS saying, you got to fund more, you got to fund more, then it'd be time to readjust them and reconnect them.
Thank you. I just have one last question. Also through your experience, we looked at you looked at four, and our staff did, main fee-related cost recovery items, that planning and building and encroachment and recreation. Per your experience, are there other things that a city like us might in the future be looking for cost recoveries?
So you see the two major areas. In every city, the two major
Building and
areas are
construction.
building and recreation. You could also have fire department cost recovery, and we're including, if you get support from another jurisdiction, that will be in your fee schedule. So if there's fire department review happening, and then occasionally we see police. Those would be the other two categories. And then the final is if you were a full service city, you might have your own water and sewer department, and they might have fee-related services.
We don't have that.
That would be it.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Morrison, I don't think you have anything. Just on that last point, and I'll have some observations maybe when we get back and bring it back to the council, but just on the question, is it at all common within Marin County to have those kinds of public safety fees charged by any jurisdiction?
You know, I don't have a great answer because I haven't studied enough Marin County fee schedules, but what I can tell you is it's very common outside of Marin County. So I have it's not uncommon for agencies to contract for services, particularly police and fire services. And when that's happening via a county entity, we can use a county fee schedule to do those services. So Sheriff's Department provides a lot of police services throughout the state on behalf of communities, and fire is provided by the state for a lot of communities. And in those cases, we can either set our own fee schedules or use the schedule that's already in place for that county sheriff or something like that.
And we kind of have a similar arrangement with Central Marin Police Authority, which serves multiple communities. I'm not suggesting that that's something we necessarily want to do now. It's just really a question whether there are other communities within Marin that try to do cost recovery for those specific types of public service.
In case it helps you, in case it helps answer your question, what I do see, I'm working with a city on the East Bay that receives fire from the city of Oakland. So or the county of Alameda. So the city of San Leandro receives fire services from the county of Alameda, but whatever fire prevention fees are collected in the city go to help offset the cost of that fire prevention contract. So we entered into a contractual agreement for fire services of $20 million per year. We know fire prevention makes up $600,000 of that a year. And we have a fire prevention fee schedule that whatever revenue comes in can help offset the cost of that $600,000. Is that what you're referencing?
Exactly.
Yes. So it's not uncommon. I just don't know if your neighbors are doing the same thing.
Well, and it's a point of reference to know whether our neighbors are doing it, and it would be useful. But it's just as a general thing, it's useful to know that there are other communities that do that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And again, without suggesting that's something we want to do or not do at this point, I just would try to get some clarification on that. So unless there are any other questions, I'm sorry.
I did want to chime in, and I know it's in the report, but maybe for the benefit of the public, one of the things we are proposing, our neighbor in the Ross Valley Fire Department does have a fairly detailed fee schedule for fire prevention services. And one of the things the chief's asked that we include, and you see reflected here, we're going to be essentially contracting with Ross Valley Fire to provide support in the fire prevention area. So we've proposed in the fee schedule that essentially we'll be passing through those costs, and that the person who's getting the service will actually pay the fee to the Ross Valley Fire Department for services
Right.
that we've arranged for them to receive. So my point is they do quite a bit of fee recovery there. I don't know if you're going more to other types of services. Of course, paramedic, we do have
Right.
fees assigned to ambulance service related to that. So.
Right, right. So there's a solid precedent for those kinds of things within our community.
It is, and of course, depending on the type of service, whether or not it's the resident or an insurance that's actually the
Yeah.
payer.
But those would be services provided by some of our kind of sister agencies, not by agencies of which we are directly participating.
Well, we're proposing for the time being, because there's talk going on that fire prevention, to really achieve economies of scale in our community, partnering with our neighboring agencies, even after we potentially consolidate, is the best bang for the buck for the community. So that's why we wanted to have this structure in place, and I think Ross Valley feels the same way. We all feel we could contribute to a joint fire prevention effort much better than trying to have a full, robust one ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Chu?
Yeah, Dan, maybe you can help clarify. I don't think we do it here in Corte Madera or Larkspur, but there are some infractions where the cost of enforcement, even if it's police, is added on to the administrative penalties, like the social host. I thought in San Anselmo, didn't that have an enhancement above and beyond the administrative fine?
I don't remember if that's correct. We've explored that from time to time with Central Marin for Larkspur and Corte Madera. We don't do that currently. When Todd Guzmano was chief, he had explored quite a bit, several areas that he wanted to add a service fee to that he had seen done in other jurisdictions. It was about that time the state actually modified the rules about what you could and couldn't assign fees to for police services, and so at that time we just stopped the review, but I won't be surprised if that comes back again. I think what makes it different from fire, where with fire prevention you're providing a clear fee service. You know, there's a benefit that can be pointed out with fire prevention services. With police, what had become an issue for the state was it was putting local jurisdictions were basically creating fee schedules to, frankly, keep revenues local and not entering into the state court system. And so I think one reason the state prohibited some of that behavior was they didn't really think that was appropriate, and they were losing revenue. So
I think more the latter reason.
Probably.
Okay, unless there are any more questions from council members, I think what we'd like to do is to open it up to the public. Are there any members of the public here tonight who would like to talk about this issue? Seeing none, we'll then bring it back to the council for comments and perspectives and consideration of a resolution. Councilmember Chu, anything?
I don't have anything else.
Councilmember Way?
I'm fine. I had my questions answered. Thank you very much for that. And also, again, for the clear and concise report that this is.
And I'm going
Councilmember
to ditto
Wilson?
that. I thought it was very thorough. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very easy to understand.
Yes.
So with that,
Nothing? No, I just kind of a philosophical observation. First of all, I think this is terrific. I think it's a wonderful thing for us to be confronting. It's a missing part of our revenue puzzle, I think, in the past, and this is an opportunity to address that. The only philosophical issue, which I think you addressed to some extent in your presentation, is how quickly we get to full cost recovery. You know, it would be my personal preference to get there faster rather than slower. But I understand we're making some changes that the public might not be accustomed to, and it's therefore maybe appropriate for to take a little bit of time before we do that. But I think I was very encouraged to hear you suggest that we do a review of these fees on a very regular basis, and make sure that we are making good progress towards as full a cost recovery as we can justify. So I think that was terrific.
Good goal.
So unless there's anything else from the council, I think we have this is an action item, and we have a proposed resolution number, I get my glasses back on, 1817, which is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur amending the fee schedule of the City of Larkspur along the lines that have been discussed in the presentation tonight. Do I have a motion?
Sure. I'll move resolution number 1817.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is passed. So that concludes our public hearings. Agenda item number 7. We move on to business items. We have 3 of those, and I think we have some materials in our agenda packet on a couple of these, but maybe not all of them. So let's just go one by one. Item number 8.1, overview of key information collected to date concerning the community facility parcel, and we will ask staff to make a presentation.
And did the council get the printouts on the dais of this? Okay, in case
Yes,
you wanted to take notes,
we
I
did.
want to make sure.
I got one, but it's just one.
Oh, so you
Oh.
didn't get this presentation? Could we get the council
I don't know that I
copies
got
of the
that,
PowerPoints,
actually.
please?
No, we didn't.
Did I? Oh, it's hiding.
Oh, no, that's 8.3. He's talking about 8.1.
Oh, okay.
So. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Okay, we got it.
Okay. Sometimes it's a little easier to read and write when you have it in front of you. So, thank you, council members. You may recall we brought back the Larkspur Library and Community Center project after having taken a hiatus. We brought it back to you in January of this year and had an open discussion with the council about what should happen next with the project. And one of the things that sort of came to light was a question of what did we purchase to date, so to speak? What did we have in the hopper, and how can we utilize that? I think there was some concern expressed that if we go back in any way from the point where we are in the process now, we were losing something. And so staff committed to come back to you and give you a sense of sort of beyond pictures of buildings, which is, I think, where the process got very fixated. Quite a bit of work occurred and has been occurring and is occurring. And it's not lost information. And so the primary goal I have this evening is to go through the status of the information with you so you have a sense of where we are, and the community has a sense of where we are. And then also, toward the end, a little food for thought and next steps. So with that, I wanted to begin by sort of summarizing what have been the 3 major processes that have occurred with respect to the community facility parcel. The first was the master planning process for the property, for the parcel itself. And as we've talked about before, a master plan is a vision plan, a 10,000-foot look at the property, where you're attempting to sort of imagine all the possibilities, and you do provide some level of detail and planning, but it's not to the degree where you're prepared to actually implement any sort of project. That was completed in 2013. And has a plan that was adopted by the council and available for the public to review. We've since had the schematic design process where we were trying to go from 10,000-foot view down to ground level, where we're getting into what would the design look like for a library and community center, how would the full utilization of the property take place. We did a lot of the background work, and we did a lot of interaction with the community and with the supporting committees. And we had then suspended the process at what was about the 50% point in terms of our milestones on the project. And then lastly, the council asked that there be a supplemental process, which was a series of community character town hall meetings. And that's mostly complete, although while the council has accepted the summaries of those meetings and had some general discussion, you haven't really given any specific direction yet on how to apply what you learned to the design of the property and or any facility. So while it's mostly complete, that's still sort of an outstanding task for the council at some point in the future. We've had 3 different consulting teams partner with us as leads from the consulting side on the project. So in the master plan, Group 4 architects were the primary or the principal support to staff. And there were advisory bodies for each of the processes. So the master plan was supported by the LARC, which was the Library and Recreation Committee. And it was a large committee that the council had taken applications for the voting members, which numbered, I think, in around 18, and then the remainder were ex officios representing many stakeholders in the community. For the schematic design, there were 2 support committees. There was a technical committee, which is primarily a staff committee. And then there was an advisory committee that was made up of members of the various bodies that would ultimately be reviewing the schematic design. So the council, the planning commission, Parks and Rec, the library board were all participating through representatives. And then for the town hall meetings, you appointed a council subcommittee. That was Councilmembers Chu and Vice Mayor Hilmer, who were the advisory body for that process. We've been asked many times to give a sense of the money spent to date, provide it here. I want to give one caveat. We converted our financial software during the master plan process, so there could be a plus or minus $5,000 on the amount we paid Group 4 because coding, when we transferred systems, we occasionally have found there's some variance there in terms of information. So I think that number's about right. I've taken it down to the dollar, which is a bad rule of thumb when you aren't sure about the accuracy. But it's in that ballpark for what we paid Group 4. And that was actually a little bit lower than their contract amount, which is also why I have a little bit of uncertainty.
And those expenditures were completed when?
Our last payment to Group 4 would have been in 2013.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's 4 years ago.
Yeah, and like I said, we were midstream in conversion. So in fact, poor Miss Orm has left because I told her, please go home after the fee schedule's done. She's been doing the heavy lifting, but I had her digging through the system frustratingly, and there actually are entries in there that say conversion of data assigned to the community facility parcel project, and so we had to actually pull some hard copy out to interpret what that meant. For the schematic design, much more confident this is a very accurate number. This is what we paid LMS to date. This is essentially their contract amount, so how we move forward, if LMS is part of the picture, we need to discuss their contract and amending their contract. And then the Grove came in right where we thought they would in terms of their contract to be the facilitators for the community character town hall meetings. Those 3 numbers don't sum to 583. There are other costs involved. The council may recall we did a mitigated neg deck. We did that primarily in-house, but we did hire some consultants to help us with some of the information we needed to complete that environmental review. That was a significant cost. That's not, there are several vendors, so I didn't break them all down for you. And then we had 2 different sets of legal costs that we incurred throughout the lifetime of this project. We've had legal costs to Myers-Nave, as you might expect. The council may recall that we also created a 501c3 that the city wanted set up as a possible vehicle for taking money donations for the building, and so there were legal costs associated with having a firm that had expertise in helping form a 501c3. Those were also costs that we incurred that are in the remainder that we have here.
And the neg deck was done for the master plan?
For the master plan,
right?
Yeah, so it's not for the future project. There'll still be environmental work there, although quite a bit of the mitigated neg decks can be relied upon for the future project. What did we take away from the master plan that I think still has life? And again, we're talking a lot of 10,000-foot view, but there is some information we collected that I want to circle back to because it's still quite valid, and also I want to explain some of its influence in the background for staff and consultants. One is there's quite a bit of the master plan process. If you go back to the LARC meetings, a lot of discussion of what the community has and what the community needs. A few of the LARC committee members took to talking. We were approaching Larkspur as a campus, and we had to figure out how this property could fit into a broader thought of a campus in terms of what already is available to the community and what we might do to fill in gaps. And so there's quite a bit of needs inventory work that was done, and some of it that I'm going to show you is in the report itself, and we have copious notes in the background. And then, of course, the environmental review I referenced, which provides some guidance in terms of concerns and issues around the building, the future project. So, got a little lag here. Let's see if the thing's going to catch up to me. Yep, technical difficulties are going to kill us here. We were trying to fix this. I apologize, Council. We thought we had this solved yesterday, and it looks like our bug is back. I think it comes only for council meetings. Okay, here we go.
We've noticed that, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, Dan, while you're getting that straight, I know we have by confinement of space here, and these are all public spaces that you outlined. I just want to make sure, and also I remember we looked at a lot of private spaces, like Book Passage has rooms that people rent, and the Masonic Hall and different things like that. So it was even more comprehensive than that.
The master plan process you're referring to, you're right. We actually did, and that's what I was sort of referencing. There's what's in the document that we published, and there's quite a bit of additional work. And if you go into the LARC meeting minutes, you can read discussions about private or quasi-public spaces that the public can utilize. But some of those spaces are free, some have a fee involved with them.
Okay. You're back up and running.
I'm back up and running at least for, well, I was for a second. It's stubborn. Okay, 1 second, please. Okay, so in the master plan, there as a summary, and you can tell the date because we have references to the Twin Cities Police in here. There are tables that sort of summarize what's available. In a moment, I want to talk about this because we actually took some actions just based on what we saw on these tables. But the red dots are the key ones. Those are things that aren't available in the community. Are not, and so you can see that there are a lot of need. There was a feeling there's a lot of need for meeting space in the community or gathering space, and that it's not being provided in public arenas. And we also, the LARC committee also took a look at the same thought process, but applied it to what's being made available to different age groups. And you can see that you have a need in some of your younger populations and then in the senior population for more meeting spaces. And then this was a sort of attempt to marry the needs assessment with the programming work that was done by Group 4. And Group 4's programming work was work that was based on a lot of the type of programming analysis for libraries that's been done around Marin County. So very similar to what I think a lot of needs assessments would look like if you were to pull out older planning documents for other communities in Marin. This analysis of what was missing was particularly influential on staff as we were evaluating what to do in the recreation department. So one of the things that's not seen here, because it's a little dated, is between 2013 and today, we made an effort to, and with the council's approval, to address what we saw as a recurring need and request for small meeting spaces. So today I'm pleased to report we, at least the city of Larkspur, can accommodate small group and conference meeting space in the recreation department, because when we did the remodel, we created a room that can be divided in two that has multimedia capability and is available to be booked through the recreation department. So we now can address some of this need. I will say the room's extraordinarily popular with the Larkspur Corte Madera School District and the Hall Middle School staff. So you're in fierce competition if you want the rooms. But we make use of them for city needs quite a bit. And we do have community groups that now use them on a regular basis. So we're trying to do something outside of the context of the master plan and the library community center to provide for this need and maybe relieve some of the demand for it as we were to look forward at the design of a facility on the property. If you go into the environmental review work for the master plan, there are two areas that I think are key information that we've relied on a lot, you've talked about a lot, and that's first parking. And I know that Councilmember Morrison, who was with us at all those LARC meetings, knows that there were some very healthy discussions about the city's parking standard and should we apply the parking standard on the property, because one, it's a challenge to do that in the space, and two, there was actually a healthy discussion of whether reduced parking was better because it would encourage folks to get to the property by other means. So I think that was a 2-meeting discussion, as I recall. I mean, we were doing other things, but
How about underground parking?
well, no, underground parking was talked about and dismissed because the water table's so high. Remember, if you recall, we did actually do a look at that, and the cost to constantly pump would be a problem. Now, I think there are folks who periodically have talked about whether we might do some creative things to create sort of a berm and have the building up above and sort of parking below that. We never did a cost analysis of that, but that's a little more physically possible than digging down into the earth. So, and the environmental review process helped us discover how challenging it would be to do underground parking. And then, of course, traffic and circulation. And in fact, the council ultimately had to decide that the traffic impacts were acceptable to make this work, because there really isn't a clean way to offset what's already a challenging traffic corridor at certain times of day. You know, at other times of day, it's an easy drive into Doherty. So one of the things that's been difficult all throughout the future process planning, and it's not given a lot of discussion in the master plan, but the staff has a significant review in the background, is we're very concerned about queuing, which is the idea of cars lining up when they want to pull into a driveway, of queuing on Doherty Drive, were we to try to make the ingress-egress of the design on Doherty Drive. As we go forward, we hear a lot of folks saying you could solve all your problems if you just put the driveway in Doherty Drive. But the problem is, if you did that and you had an event, you have the potential for 5, 6, 7 cars deep, because you're not going to have a big enough entry or turning radius to really accommodate that very well. And Doherty's not wide enough to add a proper turning lane to relieve that issue. So we may have to get creative about that and revisit it, because there are certainly some design benefits elsewhere to talk about entry on Doherty, but that's why the LARC didn't focus on that. That's why the master plan never talks about ingress and egress on Doherty. It focuses it on a driveway in Rose Lane, and that theme continues throughout the schematic design discussion. There's some other information from the master plan process. I'd say, okay, I'm behind again. So while it's coming up, while I'm getting it back up, during the master plan process, again, we're really at a surface level, but even so, we did do analysis of sun and where sunlight would hit the property, which has two important factors. One is its benefits for any solar powering we want to do, any sustainability we want to do. And also we have to think about how hot the building might get. And so there was some thought put into that during the master plan process, although we didn't really do a significant technical or detailed dive to look at that. So, but we also did a view assessment, and this was very important to the LARC, that there be consideration in the design of anything that occurred on the property of the views that surround the property. So I think I may be at a lost cause doing this by myself here. I need an assist to get through this.
Mm-hmm. View assessment and sunlight.
This is nothing new.
I think, Council, if this continues, we may bring back our old projector. This one, the computer's talking to it through the network, and there's something going on that's preventing the two devices to talk to each other. We may have to bring back the good old one with a light bulb in it and just put the presentation up that way. It's hard to believe that's old-fashioned now. So as I said, we did
Can we just hold this up in front of the camera? And you
we did a view assessment. We did a sunlight assessment. And those were valuable exercises. And as I said, we've always tried to think hard about the view in particular, because that was very important to the LARC committee. Okay, moving on to the schematic design. There's a lot of information that we did in the background, a lot of analyses for the schematic design that looks at the advantages and challenges of the site. Now, one caveat here is a lot of the data behind some of this analysis has been done through subcontractors of LMS. So I don't actually have the ability to hold up a data table for every single thing here because we haven't closed our contract with LMS, and we don't normally reconcile work in progress. A lot of times we leave data with our project team and then bring it forward on our server at some later date. And so since we sort of hit a suspension mark, I can't provide some of the background for some of this information, but it does exist, and we certainly can work out bringing it forward at a later date. But we did a more detailed sustainability analysis. I think, Council, I may have to just do this verbally because I'm going to keep stopping the presentation. We also did a traffic analysis, and we did a programming assessment. Can you please make sure as many people have?
Yeah, I was just going to say, does everybody have a copy of the hard copy? Is that available to folks?
And so those were really our big three information dumps that occurred, or information analyses that have occurred in the project: sustainability analysis, traffic analysis, and programming assessment. In the sustainability analysis, there was a desire on the part of the staff to inform the council ultimately when it was looking at the schematic designs about what would be the best way to capture any solar power and what levels were achievable in that respect. We also were trying to look at creative, cost-effective, and energy-efficient ways to do cooling and heating on the property. And there's been a lot of advancements in this area. And we also we were very mindful, and we heard a lot from the advisory committee when we would talk to them about sustainability, that we wanted to send signals to the community about our commitment, and we wanted to lead the way But we also didn't want to be so cutting edge that we were spending a lot of tax dollars down the road to constantly maintain and operate new things that hadn't quite kind of had the bugs worked out, so to speak. So we wanted to be advanced, but not on the bleeding edge of technology in this area. So that was something we kept in mind and were mindful of. One of the things that's really valuable that came out of the process is that we now have a full computer model, at least LMS does, as I was saying, at their servers, of the daylight throughout a 24-hour period, and they did that over several 24-hour periods. And so that allowed us to look at what the effects would be at different times of the day, what the challenges would be for the building during different times of the day. And I think had we not suspended when we did, we probably would have brought them on because we would want that at different seasons of the year so that we had a better analysis. They started to do some of that modeling, and we hadn't quite wrapped that up. We also didn't get around to, but we were going to do a similar model for wind because there was a lot of concern at our public workshops about the schematic design that we think about wind on the property. And folks who know the area really well had said if we're going to have these outdoor spaces, that at certain times of day, particularly late afternoon, it can get uncomfortable in this area because of the wind, and that anything we could do so the outdoor spaces had some shelter from that would be a positive. So we did have that on the plans that we were going to take a hard look at that. The other thing we did was additional look at circulation issues, and one of the things that we did, you can't see it in detail on this slide, but this is from a presentation very early in the schematic design at one of the outreach workshops. You have two competing types of traffic patterns here because you have a residential grid and then you have a commercial and civic grid sort of going on, meaning that you have folks who are trying to get home, particularly once Rose Lane came online, and you have folks in the commercial area. And so we have some very preliminary but significant analysis that we had commissioned by traffic engineers to sort of think about what this all meant for the property, what the circulation would look like on the property. And then we again looked at some parking. We haven't, since we went on hiatus, we haven't engaged in these conversations anymore, but we had hoped that overflow parking might be achieved by having a partnership with the shopping center next door. As the council knows, and some members of the public have heard us talk before, the shopping center has more than one landlord because different parts of the shopping center are separate parcels with separate owners. So it's not a simple conversation with one entity to talk about the parking lot being available for overflow parking, but that would actually create some real dynamic conversations about parking if we were to accomplish that. So that was something that we would probably revisit at a later date. A big part of the schematic design process was to do a data-driven programming analysis. And by programming, I mean how would the building that we were talking about putting on the property be used? And so we like to joke that we locked the recreation director and the library director in a room with our consultant and didn't let them out until they had figured out what the building would look like if we were operating it on a weekly basis. That's not totally fair to them or fair to the public. We actually, at the early parts of the schematic design outreach, we collected a lot of public opinion about what they would want to do if they were, what people in the public would want to do with the building. We actually had cards that we still have where folks filled out, if I were here, what would be the main thing I'd want to do while I was at the building. And at the second workshop for the schematic design, we had come with pretty copious summaries of what we had heard from the public so that the folks who came to the second workshop could go through that with us and give us additional feedback. But we did do a very detailed week in the life analysis, and I'm going to keep that one and talk to you about it a little bit toward the end because I've had a chance to go back and really dive into what was done. We also did a survey. And I think that we probably had the library staff down there, and they wouldn't let you come in the library unless you at least were aware there was a survey. And if you didn't like using a computer, they handed you a printout because they really wanted to get that response rate up. And so they ended up with a healthy dose of 400-something responses to it, I believe was the number when it was all said and done. Granted, a lot of it were folks who had come in and sort of not been prepared to take a survey, but they were nice enough to do it. We did get a lot of folks who did it online as well. And then, like I said, we did workshops to vet with the public what programming would look like. And from that, we also had some discussion of how would we do staffing for all this different programming. This is not intended for you to read. You've seen these tables a lot. If I had this all blown up for you, or I brought you the old poster boards that we still have, this is where LMS had taken all this programming feedback and assigned square footage to it. And then in the bottom right is actually the what would happen every hour in the building over the course of a week that Francis and Dick prepared for us after we had locked them in that room together. And I said I wanted to circle back. One of the things that you start to see as a theme in the input that we got from the public is that a regular theme from the public is we want a multi-generational facility. We want something that serves everybody. But when you got folks to talk candidly, they still wanted some separation. They still wanted, if you were older, you tended to say you wanted a space that was a little calmer and a little quieter. And if you were younger, you had children, you wanted a little bit more active space. That's sort of what I'd say is a broad brush summary of what we heard from a lot of folks. You can see some of the influence of that in the programming analysis, because there's an effort here to program the spaces so that there's not a lot of cross-pollination of young and old competing in the different spaces. And I think going forward, as we talk about next steps, there's some thoughts I have on what we may want to do in revisiting this issue of how we were proposing to utilize space. One of my favorite analyses, and again, this is up on the website, you can zoom into this and really look at it. My intention here wasn't that we would dive into the weeds, but LMS did a lot of work to show you the relative scale of existing rooms throughout the community, which are a lot of the gray boxes, and what the needs were telling us we needed in terms of size and square footage. And that started to give us a sense of how much building we might or might not need. The other thing they did was they interviewed the recreation and library staff to get a better sense of when programming actually happens in different types of rooms, how do you set the rooms up? And that actually can drive how big the room should or shouldn't be. I like to summarize all that work, and it's a lot. It's copious notes of how this might work, what it would look like, but I always summarize it as this. My takeaway is you can program a small activity in a big room. You can't program a big activity in a small room. And that general theme became influential when we were reaching the midpoint, and I think influenced some of the programming discussion was a focus on larger rooms because they're more accommodating of the full breadth of programming that might take place. So what should we do now? We've got all this information that folks can go on the website, or we'll be happy to provide for them to take a look. As I said, although I don't have every single scientific study if LMS is in possession of some of them still. Separate and apart from the process that we're re-engaged in here, the council has talked about revisiting infrastructure needs in general. And you've talked to the staff about revisiting the 2050 plan, which is a plan that the city adopted to provide some guidelines about key infrastructure needs. You'll recall in January when we brought this project to you, staff had recommended that we are no longer chasing dollars. There's no pot of money that we're chasing by trying to get a design done, which was driving us in the past. So maybe now it's time to catch our breath and talk about affordability and what we can actually afford to build. And that marries very nicely with the council's concern about infrastructure in general. And in fact, the 2050 plan talks about library need in particular. So I think we have an opportunity to fold some aspects of the discussion we need to have about affordability into the broader context of a revisit of the 2050 plan. And that's actually something we have scheduled in terms of what to do process-wise for April 5th, is how we're going to revisit the 2050 plan. So we're going to launch that review in April, take direction from the council, and I think we want to fold in what is the affordability of this particular building, because we have to put it in the context of all our other infrastructure challenges. Council knows at our last meeting we wrestled with a rather significant infrastructure challenge that has the potential to really take away a lot of our spending capacity, which is the Bon Air Bridge. So how do all our needs, how do our streets, storm drains, all the infrastructure needs that we need to address this building, our fire stations, how does it all fit together? And I think a natural thing to do here is to start to talk about how much building can we afford. And that may change our thoughts on design after we talk about how much building we can afford.
Dan, just for the public's benefit, can you just give a little bit more background on the 2050 plan, about its genesis and what it was intended to accomplish?
I could, but I would actually like to defer to Councilmember Chu, because he was a very active participant in the process. So
well,
he'd be a better expert than me.
We'll get to that in a minute then. Go ahead and finish your presentation.
Oh, okay. And then again, place that affordability in context. What else might we want to do? What are some future meetings about this particular process? So I think one is, if we start to talk about the building we can afford, and if that building is smaller than the footprint we've talked about in the past, then we start to have to go back to programming, and we have to ask ourselves some tough questions about what we can and can't do. So one thing that isn't done in the programming analysis is a prioritization. If we only have so much space, what has to give? That's not a fun conversation, because that's a conversation that pits a lot of interests against one another. But it probably has to take place, because in the past, we've tried to accommodate all our needs. And we've tried to accommodate all our interests in a library and all our interests in recreation. But if we start to talk about a smaller facility, and I'm not saying we will, but if affordability means smaller, and it could, then we need to talk about prioritizing programming needs. So I think that needs to be talked about. And specifically, as I referenced it, we tried to really accommodate this desire that we were hearing in the public to provide for adult uses and children uses as much as possible and separately, near each other but not on top of each other, as I guess I'd summarize it. Maybe that's not realistic if we end up having to prioritize needs and we have to talk about a smaller footprint. So that'll have to be a key discussion that takes place in this. I will tell you one thing that Linda Demers, who was the consultant on the programming, if I brought her here right now, I feel very confident one of the things she would say to you is, children always get underserved when this discussion happens. And what I also will tell you is the space allocated in the building for children and teens is on par with Mill Valley, which was often a library cited as one that does it right. So again, going to sort of thinking how we engage folks in a realistic conversation of our needs, it's important to make sure all the people are represented, and getting children's interests represented properly is a challenge. I acknowledge it. We've had challenges in the past. Who are the right voices to speak to children's needs? It's not an easy question. And then I think I'm going to die here, so I can just have to read it out. The other issue that came up, and if the last bullet had appeared, there was a strong interest in the entire collection as we know it now living in the new building. And I know Councilmember Morrison will remember a very heated discussion at the Lark about how many books needed to be in a library. I remember this going on for quite a while because the committee was not of one mind about this. But in the schematic design, the evolution of discussion resulted in an effort to bring the collection as we know it into the new facility. it might be time to go back to that disagreement that was occurring at the Lark, and I think was really one thing the Lark never fully resolved was what's the appropriate amount of a collection in a library going forward. For the schematic design, the way we resolved that was to try to be flexible in how we would house the collection so that the spaces being dedicated to collection could be converted to another use down the road. But maybe we need to accelerate that conversation now because that might be another way that we could talk about a different footprint in different space. So I think two really important conversations we could start sooner rather than later. How do we prioritize the needs if it comes to that? And then this, how much needs to be on site in a collection? And how much is in a building doesn't mean the collection goes away. There's a lot of libraries that store some of the collection off site and retrieve it on demand, and maybe that's a solution. And we've never had that conversation. So there are two areas when staff and I were vetting that popped out as areas we could make some really immediate progress and keep going forward, I think, in a constructive way. While we have this affordability discussion, which I think is critical at this point, because we're not seeing any signals from the state that the library bond's going to appear on the ballot anytime soon, which is a shift from a few years ago. And that was the big pot that had pressed us to try to get a design done so that we were shovel ready for that bond. Right. So that's the overview. I'll keep fighting the computer while you ask me any questions.
Go ahead. And just on that last point, there's the failure of the bond process, but we've had some other funding challenges as well. So it puts it all in a bit of perspective. And if it's all right, I would actually invite Councilmember Chu to give us a little bit of a background on 2050 because it does provide an important context for this conversation.
Yeah, I'll try and sum it up in a couple paragraphs. 2050 committee was put together in 2001 to study the planning and financial needs of Larkspur. And it was to look at a 50-year horizon. So that's how they came up with the name 2050 Committee. The committee's task was to look at all the specific areas of need and then try and identify some priority based upon that need. And that's where you'll see things like City Hall and the police station being tied for first. And I believe second was then the fire station and City Hall. And third was a combination of roads, bridges, and storm drains. And then I believe the library then was fourth, followed by parking and then finishing it with, I believe, public works. It's been a while, but that's kind of how I recall it, and I think I'm fairly close on that.
Larry, was shared services talked about?
At that time, shared services was not talked about in that committee, but when I was elected in 2003, that was one of my key issues, and other council members at that time also realized that there was a need for that. We already had the Twin Cities Police Authority, so that was a good model to work from.
So that's very helpful. Thanks very much for that. Let me just bring it all kind of back to the council for kind of overall questions of staff on their report. Councilmember Chu, do you have anything you'd like to contribute?
No, I think that was a real good report to kind of kick this process off again. It kind of summarizes where we've been and, bring other members of the community who haven't been involved in it as long, up to speed in terms of where we are.
Councilmember Wade?
I'll echo Larry on that. I have just a few questions. First is, since this last 2014 spring when we got to the 50%, we call it the 50%, I'm like Donald Trump now doing little air quotes.
Be careful.
I know. We're continuing to collect resource and use data, I assume, and I'm hoping we can continue in that process in our transition to a new library director, and I'm very pleased to know Janice is interested in this process. Have we seen any significant changes? I mean, anecdotally, I've seen many more kids in the library, but I don't know if our data is showing things now that are different from 2 years ago. And one before you jump in, Janice, the last question, the other question I have about the 2050 plan that Larry just mentioned, have we revisited that in the last 5 years or 10 years since I've been on council for 3? I think it's an excellent time to revisit that, and I'm wondering when our last full-on assessment of that was.
I'll answer the first or the second question,
Okay.
then we'll pass it to Janice. We've never gone back the way I understand, and we're going to come on April 5th to talk about kicking off, which is really diving in and saying what's the priorities, what are the costs, if there's only so many dollars, how are we going to spend it? We haven't done that since the plan was adopted. One of the things I asked the council, and you took action on a few years back, was the plan can be interpreted, and Councilmember Chu and I have talked about this several times, it's hard to interpret if the committee intended to prioritize the needs because they did number them, and the community spent a lot of energy and time to deal with, I think they labeled it 1A, the police station was priority 1A. But there were other priorities on the list that weren't ranked as high if you think that's the prioritization. And one of my concerns was what happens if a opportunity arises. I didn't want to appear that staff was working in violation of the plan. So the only action since I've been here was we did adopt the approach that staff could move a priority up when money or an opportunity exists, which is one of the reasons the courtyard moved to the top of the list, was both the need to address that accelerated and then also the opportunity to move into the school district courtyard permanently manifested, and to jump on those. We moved it up the list. So I don't view the numbers as much a directive, and it's just not clear in the record to me what that intent was.
Actually, there is a mention of it probably in a very small paragraph that they weren't meant to be solidly in that order. Because like you're saying, if opportunities come up where you can do it, then it should be considered. The other thing was that the courtyard also came up because it was a dependency on getting out of the space in order to get the police station in place.
Well, I think in just listening to the list of 6 items that Larry recited, I mean, we've already accomplished 3, if not 4 of those to a significant part with the courtyard and 2 of our 3 bridges, a pavement maintenance plan, the fire consolidation discussions, and the police station. So.
Oh, sorry, Dick, I forgot the parks too.
Oh, the parks, the park master plan.
And I think we're going to have plenty of time to kind of take a look at that. I think that's the process that we're embarking upon now. So if I could keep it focused on any additional questions for staff, Councilmember Morrison.
Can I just...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Janice.
Sure. I just wanted to say that there are lots of statistics that both we keep internally in the library here and in Marin County, California-wide, countrywide. Basically, the circulation of books across the country, and we mirror this, is dropping. Not so many people come and take out books anymore. So the core collection is quite different. And the needs for the imprint for a core collection is, for hard copy books, is trailing down. The e-books going up, but not as significantly as you would imagine. The main difference between 2014 and 2017, and is significant in any planning going forward, is in terms of access. We have, through Link Plus, access to over 10 million books in California and Nevada, and we can usually get them here within 24, 48 hours. It makes a big difference in terms of what do we collect, how long do we need to keep something. And in fact, right now we're going through a major weed in the library. I spoke with the library staff today. We feel we could reduce the collection by at least 50% downstairs, and you would not notice it. There's so many books down there haven't been taken out for 10 plus years or more. So in terms of what this means, in terms of size and what data we can provide, it's quite significant.
And the only thing I'd like to add, with the benefit I haven't been here a little longer than Janice, you asked about anecdotal evidence. I think particularly after the recession, we'd started to see folks of all ages coming to use the Wi-Fi. We really are one of the few Wi-Fi spots in the downtown. And so we have folks sitting on, when it's nice weather, out on the grass. We have folks constantly in the lobbies. And we have lots of folks in the library whose only reason to be there is to get on the Wi-Fi access, which is one of the reasons we agreed to participate, the county's going to beef up that Wi-Fi access for everybody in libraries. But that demand, I can tell you in the 7 years I've been here, just the sheer number of people sitting around with a computer has gone off the charts.
Okay, great, thank you. So I want to get to the public, but Councilmember Morrison, did you have a question?
But yes, the LARC committee brings back such fun memories. There were so many meetings, very interesting and endearing conversations we had. But that was a concern, Janice, what you just said in 2014. We kind of predicted that would be the situation, especially with Kindle, et cetera. And so I would like to hear from the public also, and I thought all the councils asked perfect questions. So let's move on and listen, and we'll come back to the council.
Okay, so unless there are any further questions, not comments, but questions from the city council members, we'll turn it over to the public. So if you have anything from the public you'd like to say, please approach the podium and let us know your name and where you live. And I'm going to keep all public comments strictly to 3 minutes, so keep that in mind, please.
Grace Hughes, Crystal Creek, Larkspur. Mr. Mayor and council members, I come before you tonight with some background being on the 2050 committee and other public and volunteer committees through the years. It brings me to now. And I would like to suggest that the time has come to face reality and to look to the highest and best use of the city-owned property at Rose Lane, rather than leaving the 2.5 acres available there to lie fallow for years to come for lack of funds to develop a project that has obviously not been able to find a viable funding path. It is abundantly clear, both from your own housing element and reports from throughout the county, that we have a critical need for affordable housing in our community, and specifically affordable housing for seniors. In the 2012 housing element, 89 seniors in Larkspur were identified as living below the poverty level, supporting the cited need for low and very low units to be constructed. What better response to the mandate that was given when approving the Rose Lane development that the 2.5 acres would be developed for community use? Then to meet the pressing community needs cited in our housing element with the construction of at least 40 units of senior affordable housing. By deeding the site to a nonprofit housing developer such as Eden, EAH, Mercy, or any other interested affordable housing organization, you would be accomplishing more than one objective: fulfilling your commitment to the housing element that you filed with the state, answering a critical community need, and very importantly, not adding to the ever-increasing fiscal demands on our city budget. The costs heretofore spent on consultants' plans and community involvement have been considerable and have led to a rather disappointing conclusion. We have no financially viable plan, leaving us with a large, open, unsightly field and squandering a significant asset in our community. I would urge you to give serious consideration to the foregoing suggestion, engage in serious discussion, and realize that the opportunity you have to meet the highest and best ideals of your commitment to public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. You're right on time. Next speaker, please.
My name is Susan Schmidt. I live at 58 Piedmont Road here in Larkspur. I'm not going to be able in my 3 minutes allotted to refute all of the points I disagree with in Mr. Schwartz's presentation. I think you are very familiar with them. I challenge the characterization of the process. I challenge the characterization of the amount of community involvement. issues about most of the decisions having been made in private by a small handful of people and not enough public input and awareness of what was going on. The list goes on, and you're well familiar with it, and I've done a lot of research, and I'm happy to share it if you have misplaced the many letters and documents I've sent to the City Council. I guess what brings me here is we are now almost 3 years into this process, and we have had now on a shelf someplace for over a year a design that is that there's lots of reason to believe this community will not support. Many people have spoken to the fact that it's not functional, it's much too large, it's much too expensive, it's much too urban and out of character with the environment. We have architects that have had repeated chances to design something that's more in keeping with the character of the community. And they don't seem to be able to handle that. So my question is, after all of this time, I understand that there's some good work that was done about needs and use, but what is the council's plan moving forward about how to proceed with this project? Are you committed to keeping this design and simply tweaking it? All this conversation about how the light is going to hit in the various rooms is not very relevant if, in fact, we're going to go back to the drawing board and look at a design that's more in keeping with the feedback we've had. It seems to me we are right now at a point where we have no money, we have no shared vision by the community, no plan for moving forward, a design very unlikely the community is going to support, an architect that is not really in touch with the character of this community. So it would really be helpful, rather than to keep coming to these meetings and having this frank discussion delayed and delayed, to hear from this council. If you're talking about reopening this process, relooking at the needs and coming up with some way we can meet those needs, or if you are actually thinking of going forward with this design. Appreciate just some frank conversation.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else from the public, please?
Hi, Michelle, Malcolm McVeigh, Eliseo Drive in Greenbrae. I just want to say thank you so much for putting this on the agenda. I echo the comments that have already been made to say this has been a process that people I feel like it's been a little bit drawn out, and it's nice to see that there's some enthusiasm around bringing up this topic. I think the thing that maybe echo in agreement with is there needs to be some type of timeline. I think what we've been floundering a little bit in terms of the design, and appreciate that there maybe people who don't believe in what's been put together, and that's okay, but I think even just being able to get to that, address it, come up with a timeline that says, this is how we're going to plan to re-engage the community, this is who's going to be accountable for that, this is the lead contact for that. I think that would help people at least know where to sort of say, this is where the footprint is going to be made, and this is what's going to look like, and so then we can debate and have conversations about it. But I think until we have a timeline that we're going to agree to even get to that initial agreement, and it's going to be hard to consider in terms of fundraising what that will look like. Also, I think there feels like a little bit of an assumption, and I appreciate that the City Council has a lot of stress over affordability, but it feels like you're taking that ownership on yourself in terms of what this is what we have to pay, but yet we haven't really tapped into the community that we have because we haven't kind of reached that agreement around what can possibly be in terms of private donations. So I think leaving that open and not saying it has to be just the city in and of itself, but actually if we can engage the community and participate, there are a lot of people who want to help. So I'll leave that to you. Thanks.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Anyone else from the public, please? Seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the council for comments and observations. Councilmember Chu.
One of the things that's real clear about the 2050 plan is that despite the fact that the numbers are 15 years old, it was clear that the burden of financing the library would be placed upon, funds coming from other than the city. Because it was very clearly stated that that would mostly come from private funds. So, I welcome this discussion about the 2050 process, where we really haven't had a chance to review it, because originally it was supposed to be every 5 years. And what it'll allow us to do is take a look at some of our remaining infrastructure needs and figuring out how we're going to pay for those things. And, the library will just fall into wherever that shakes out. If it stays where it is, number 4 on the list, then, that's what the community and the council decides is the appropriate place for it, then that's what we continue working on. But if it turns out that we have other needs that are more urgent, things that we can afford, things that we can actually accomplish, then that might be a direction to pursue as well. So I just look forward to the discussion when we can have that in the right context, because it's part of the overall infrastructure plan that we haven't revisited in a long time.
Okay. Since I'm right-handed, I have a tendency to always start this, so I'm going to switch.
Thank you.
and go to
Because all the
Councilmember
good
Morrison.
questions have already been asked. I have to say, I find that the enthusiasm to kickstart this whole process is out there in the public. For the first time, we had the library board and the rec commission come together. They were very eagerly supporting the idea. They worked together how they want to foresee the future. So I thought that was really great to hear and see the enthusiasm that's out there. So that's exciting. Timeline, I think it's important to create a timeline. In fact, Dan, I want to ask you, where are we right now with the architects? Are we fully done with them? Do we have more time with the architects? What's the update there?
We've expended the amount of money that was authorized in the agreement. So we put that, when that occurs, we put it in a holding pattern until we discuss with the council whether you want to authorize additional monies for additional work. And I think in this particular case, that's still a conversation that's outstanding for the council. So I guess to answer your question, I'm not interacting with them a lot right now because we don't have that capacity in the contract.
Okay. Well, I just think there's been so much history and so much work that with all the data that we have, I know that we can come to a conclusion that will compromise with a lot. I think that compromising is very important. I don't think we need to be so negative. I think there's ways we can have a public discussion and come to a conclusion where not everyone's going to be satisfied, but there will be a wonderful compromise and an output or an understanding where everyone can find some type of happiness and excitement about the whole process. So I'd like for the council to continue this discussion. I know, Dan, you mentioned April the 5th. I think we should have more public meetings, maybe have another one, but I'm not too sure who will facilitate it. But I would like to hear more from the public with the information. Dan, I thought you did a great presentation. I think it was quite accurate. I was there. I think we have other people out there that were there. I think it's very thorough and complete. So I would like to continue the conversations, and I'd like the council to take a commitment and come to an understanding how we're going to proceed versus just putting it aside and waiting.
Okay. Anything further?
No.
Good. Okay. Councilmember White.
Well, this has been an interesting process, and I know it's been going on for a long time with the city through the LARC commission or committee and then other things. We've had ups and downs. We've had lots of great ideas. We've had some tragedies that have diverted focus on this for a while. I've heard a tremendous amount of people interested and enthusiasm for a new space within this community, for a library and a community center. But I've also come to the reality that we have a lot of financial needs that we have to pay for along the way. And I think revisiting the 2050 plan and realizing that we have bills to pay and we have a fiduciary duty to meet our obligations for the best use of the taxpayer dollars of what we have to pay for. Our pension obligations, huge. Our infrastructure needs are huge, and that all has to come through the further analysis of the 2050 plan, so that strategy, I think, is very appropriate. This is a project that is needed, but I need to hear better about where we prioritize our other needs. I respect that there are other opportunities on this parcel, perhaps, and while I'm not ready to commit to that because much of the community has already been committed to this being a community facility parcel, the structure of paying for it is inconclusive. So I want to move forward, but not until we have that conversation about finance. I've said that before, and I think putting it in the context of the 2050 plan is an excellent strategy because we've already articulated needs long before this came up that need to be also accounted for. So I'm not ready for a timeline other than the fact that the 2050 plan and the revisit of those key infrastructure needs has to be done. I mean, this lot's ours. It's
That's
not
part of the
going anywhere.
timeline.
Yeah. I was reminded when I went to the League of California Cities meeting and met an assistant city manager from an East Bay city who's been working on a project similar to this for 10 to almost 15 years now. And I'm not saying we're going to do that, but I'm just saying that these are, we need to put the things that are crucial for us to pay for on the front page, on the front part of the stove. How's that? That's where I'm standing at this now. And I appreciate everybody's input. I know we have very different opinions in some contexts in some part of this community. And Grace, I appreciate your philosophical and very respectful way of having us consider alternative uses for this. And believe me, it's a conversation that still needs to continue. That's where I stand.
Okay. Well, I guess I get to go last. I appreciate everyone being here tonight and expressing their views about this challenging project. I share, I think, many frustrations that have been expressed both in this meeting as well as in other settings about the length of time that this process has taken, about, in some cases, the lack of transparency, or at least the perceived lack of transparency, and in some cases, a perception of predetermined outcomes. I kind of made a commitment, I think, to the public when I first assumed this role, speaking of timelines, that it was my goal to conclude my tenure as mayor of the city, having made material progress towards resolving this problem and providing the community with a way forward with respect to this parcel. That way forward, in the past, we focused the discussion mostly on design issues and accommodating interests that we may or may not be able to accommodate in light of the funding constraints that we have. So part of this discussion will be a discussion about financial priorities for the city. That's why we brought the 2050 concept into this. But I think this is all eminently doable. As we've been reminded when we've been challenged a little bit on the Bon Air Bridge about the length of time that original design has taken, people make comparisons about how quickly they put up the Golden Gate Bridge by comparison to what we're contemplating with the Bon Air Bridge. I think we have made a mistake by making this process a little more complicated than it needs to be. And I really am optimistic that we can make, as I said, material progress towards achieving a community consensus, both on how this parcel is going to be developed, if it's going to be developed, and providing funding mechanisms to accomplish that by the end of this year. We're going to start that discussion on April 5th. We're going to start that discussion within a framework that we've identified as the 2050 plan. But that's certainly not the be-all and end-all of what this conversation is going to entail. So I think we have the beginnings of a new process that will lead to a positive outcome sooner rather than later, and that remains my commitment to this community. That's it. So this is not an action item? With that, I think we've concluded with this matter. And we will move on to item number 8.2, appointment of council members to a general plan update steering committee. Do you want to take a break?
Let me ask, is the 2050 plan online yet? Can we?
It's been online for a
It was,
while.
okay.
always been
I have a
online.
copy of it. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that everybody knows it's
It was
there.
never taken offline.
Okay.
Fine,
We'll,
we're gonna
but
get done.
we'll put a front and center link in advance of the April 5th meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Let's give everybody a moment to clear out here.
it's on.
So we can get out of here before 10 o'clock, which would be a record so far this year, and move to 8.2, which I said was appointment of council members to a general plan update steering committee, and if we can hear staff about that subject.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Haroff and members of the City Council. I'm Neil Toff, the Planning and Building Director. I've given you in the staff report kind of a pretty extensive background on the general plan update going back to the initiation in 2010, the general plan Citizens Advisory Committee work concluding with their draft recommendation for a draft general plan in 2012. I won't go through all the details. There were kind of like the community facility parcels, some veering off the course, working on stationary plan, updating the housing element and the Larkspur community facility as well, and a lot of work in the Rose Garden. But we're here to discuss moving forward on the general plan. The update that has been approved by the Citizens Advisory Committee is largely an update of the 1990 general plan. There are no very substantive changes to land use, nothing to land use densities and growth policies. Staff and the CAC updated background information, existing conditions, goals, policies, and programs for the various elements. And we have the draft plan, and that can be viewed on the city's website. And while it is a strong framework for the general plan update, there are a variety of technical matters, other tasks to be addressed in finalizing the draft, bringing it forward for public hearing, including environmental review for that document. There are more recent issues of significance that were not addressed during the CAC review. For instance, as Mayor Haroff mentioned, we're about to receive a countywide sea level rise vulnerability study. I believe this will be very informative for certain areas of our city that are vulnerable. It'll be providing near, medium, and long-term scenarios, and this is important to future planning, and it will be providing some beginning direction for hardening protection and adaptation policies that we can look at in the general plan update. The city will also, for instance, need to address VMT standards now adopted by the state of California. And while we believe the city is in relatively good position to meet these standards, our growth will largely be focused in locations near transit and services. The mandate does present a new metric we'll need to develop and consider as part of this general plan update. Additionally, in the Smart Station Area Plan, there was direction by the City Council to review various policies of the Station Area Plan not related to land use and densities, policies relating to circulation, open space, for inclusion in the general plan. So there's still a number of tasks. Staff is positioned to reactivate the process But we do not want to attempt to really complete the plan at this point in a bubble administratively. We are requesting the council authorize development of a steering committee, appointment of a steering committee comprised of 2 council members and 2 planning commissioners to assist staff with finalizing the draft plan for public review. We anticipate the committee would attend study sessions and/or public workshops to provide feedback on the draft, maps, graphics, format, and also to provide guidance on some of these remaining policy issues. Make sure we're really keeping consistent with the community's vision. The study sessions and workshops would be focused on specific topics such as sea level rise, traffic improvements, circulation around the smart station. And these would be open to the public and in some cases may involve our outreach to specific community groups and/or stakeholders. So with that, if the council agrees to this direction and appoints 2 members for this committee, we'll schedule this matter before the commission at the end of the month, and then I'll begin to formulate the work program based on this structure moving forward. Do you have any questions for staff?
Councilmember
I
Morrison.
do. Thank you. I do not. It's a good idea, though.
I'm channeling my left hand.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember White.
Neil, do you have any idea of how many meetings that you think would be a reasonable estimate
Well,
of the subcommittee?
You know, I think we would be working at about 1 to 2 meetings a month at the most.
Okay.
And probably one of our first tasks is I develop sort of a basic framework of a work program, but then circulate that with the subcommittee. Get to know the draft as it is, and then get a real sense of here are topics we're going to discuss and kind of work that program forward. I would anticipate hopefully within a year's time we'd have a draft that's really ready for public review. And part of what we want to do is make sure we're not putting forward policies or doing we'd like to make sure the environmental review that is done, and that costs a lot of time and resources, is consistent with the direction that we want to move forward as we bring the draft to public hearing.
Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Chu?
No, I don't have anything. It's a good idea.
It's a great idea.
Help us move us along.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah.
And I think we just know at this point there's still feedback we need to get, working through a bit more workshop and public review.
So tonight, all you want to do is get 2 council members appointed, and you'll come back to us with what you want the goals of that committee to be?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So before we bring it back to the council, unless there's more questions, are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the council for comment and appointment.
I have an idea, Larry.
Who wants to do it?
I have an idea. So I know that Kevin Harf sits on the Planning Commission. He's the liaison, and the alternate is Catherine Way.
Oh, well, we can have the 2 of them do it if they're willing.
And I would be happy to be the alternate. So if you both, if one of you cannot make, I'd be happy to fill in for your seat. Okay? Are you okay?
Yep.
Unless,
okay
Larry, you want to do it.
No, I'm fine.
That was straightforward.
I already asked you.
If this were a money thing, it'd be a lot easier for me to raise my hand, but I'm not good at, say, trying to figure out.
Parking.
Yeah, parking or what color to paint your house or something.
I'm sure you can learn.
I have to say, when Larry and I attended the meeting yesterday over the proposed tax for the Greenbrae Property Owners Association, somebody was talking about money issues, and my eyes glazed over, and I mentioned to one of the members of the audience that whenever money issues come up in our city council meetings, I always defer to Larry.
Especially pension money issues.
So do we need a motion for this appointment?
I don't think so, Mr. Mayor. I think you can just make the appointment.
Okay, then I appoint myself, and I appoint Councilmember Way to serve on this committee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Watch out, Neil.
We'll be in touch, and we'll certainly try to make sure it's engaging, succinct, and efficient process.
Okay.
Of course.
And goodies, yeah. Keep everyone happy.
That concludes agenda item 8.2, so we'll move on to the last agenda item of the evening, which is 8.3.
I'm going to give this a shot again on the screen. So,
Oh.
Curtis, I'm going to be your flipper. You just give me a signal when you want to
Let me introduce it for the record first. So public
All right.
engagement concerning street repair and essential city services measure C. And we're going to hear an informational presentation about our public outreach.
Yes, just briefly, council members, you authorized me to engage the services of various support staff to do analysis regarding Measure C and its potential renewal on the ballot this year. So one of the things we've done in the past and did this time is a community survey, and Curtis Bello is here to go over the highlights with you.
All right, welcome Mayor and members of the council. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm on the tail end of one of these endless winter colds, so I am coughing. I will try to spare you from that. But my name is Curtis Bello from FM3 Research. We've done research for your city on a number of occasions in the past. Many of those surveys led to eventually Measure C. And we're going to conduct this other survey here, and we'll do some comparisons back to the research we did in the past. Dan, we can move on. All right, so a little bit about the survey we conducted. We did 402 interviews with residents here in the city of Larkspur who are likely to vote in an election coming up this November. So a somewhat low turnout given that it's an odd year election. And based upon past voting histories, we were able to come up with that model. We did a little bit different than past surveys in the past where we used to do them exclusively on the phone. This time we did an online and phone version. So roughly half-ish of the respondents were in each of those different modes. It's getting a little more challenging to conduct telephone interviews exclusively, so doing these dual mode surveys is becoming a little more commonplace for cities of your size. For looking at the margin of error here, the overall results margin of sampling error is 4.9, so we'll call it 5%. We did some split sampling where we took half the respondents and asked them slightly different questions. And when we did those, keep in mind that the margin of error is about 7%, and I'll highlight that as needed. Okay. Pardon me. So the first section here is general views about life in Larkspur and city government, a few questions we asked them along those lines. So you'll see here one of the first questions we had, and the language there in the gray box is the actual language we asked. And the overall job Larkspur city government is doing, and a majority of survey respondents said city government is doing an excellent or good job at 56%. Actually,
oops, sorry, I went too fast.
So you had about a quarter who said poor or fair. About another 1 in 5 said don't know, so 19%. You'll see here there's not a lot of really strong opinions. So the excellent bar isn't particularly large, and the poor bar is very, very small. But by and large, you've got a generally positive impression of city government here. Next slide, please. And we have a few data points going back over time, and you'll see that that 56% for excellent good is a few points lower, but basically in that same ballpark, oscillating around the sort of mid-upper 50s to low 60s range going back to 2011. So the general impressions of city government have remained relatively constant over this time period. Another question we asked here was to try to gauge what are residents and voters most concerned about? What are the big problems and things that they find most pressing? And the structure we used here for this question was we read a list of items in random order and said, how serious of a problem is this for the city of Larkspur? And they told us whether it was an extremely serious problem, very serious somewhat, or not too serious a problem. And if they were unsure, they told us that as well. And so sort of brownish bars that are the extremely or very serious problems, and we summarize those on the right-hand side of these slides. So you'll see the top 2 items by far were road issues, just straight up potholes or a broader category of deteriorating roads. And in both those cases, you have roughly 2/3 of respondents who said both of those were, either of those were an extremely or very serious problem facing the city. And really nothing else besides, storm drains got to 50%, but nothing else was really in that category. So looking at a couple of the other items here, we have the aforementioned storm drains, a couple of finance issues related to state budget cuts, pensions, flooding on local streets. But none of these things are generating a whole lot of intensity anywhere near roads. Let's move on to the next slide. And we have 2 slides in this series. So these are a bunch of items where you start to see these green bars get bigger. Particularly the dark green bar, which is respondents who said, hey, that's not too serious of a problem. So a little more dismissive of those items. And you look down here in the last two items here, you'll see that you had basically half of the respondents who are more dismissive of these as big problems, and it's the amount people pay in sales taxes and jobs in the local economy. So these broader economic things just not really getting people as concerned nearly as the condition of the roads here in the city. The next couple slides will really highlight this fact. If you move on. So the condition of city streets here. That same scale that we use to basically give city government a rating, we used it here for the condition of city streets. 2% feel like the city streets are excellent here. 18% said good. And you've got 31 only fair, and just about half, 48% saying poor. Put that only in front of fair to give it like a little bit of a negative tinge, and that's why we're grouping them together. So basically you have 4 out of 5 saying something negative about the quality of roads here in the city.
Do these responses reflect whether their street's been paved recently?
Well, staff also suggested that may be reflective of the 18% there who said they're good. No, we don't have a correlation with that.
I bet you'd find one.
Sky and I were just wondering if Rose Lane, 8 Rose Lane residents probably represent the 2%, right?
That's not right. But it gets worse. So the next slide here, which is, what do you think about the future of the roads here? Are they getting better, getting worse, or kind of about the same? So 1 in 10, 11% said think they're getting better, but just about 2/3, 65% think they're getting worse. So I think this comes as no surprise to anyone here, but this is a pretty stark picture of the residents here of the city and the voters feeling like the roads are a major problem.
But they are getting worse. Our public works would tell you so. Because even though we pave it, it degrades faster than you can fix them.
Yes, yeah. So they're not incorrect. All right, so the next section we have is looking at the possibility of renewing Measure C. And we looked at, again, if you can go, a couple different versions of this here. So basically we looked at one measure which would be a straight renewal at the half-cent rate that Measure C established. The other one would be going to a 3/4 cent. And basically the language for those, and we'll look on the next slide, was essentially the same. There's a couple different variations, but you'll see sample ballot language we designed here, which is very similar to the language of Measure C, frankly. So we're mirroring that language there with a couple different changes. There's been a few changes to state law since Measure C was passed. One of them is that when you're putting a ballot measure together, you have to say what the aggregate amount is that it's raises on an annual basis. So that language is, so all finance measures or sales taxes have to put in some sort of estimate as to how much they raise on an annual basis. That's new from when you put Measure C on the ballot. Here's the language we tested, pretty similar to Measure C. On the next slide, you'll see how respondents reacted to that. So for the 3/4 cent, for both of these things, they basically had very broad, strong support. Keep in mind that a Measure C and a Measure C renewal measure are both general purpose measures. And so they require a majority vote to pass. So 50% plus 1. A 3/4 cent version of this had support from 73% of respondents, and a half cent was at 68%, with right around a quarter-ish for both of them indicating they'd vote no. And a couple benchmark things here. First of all, this is obviously well above the margin of vote threshold for a majority vote measure. It's well outside the margin of error, even for these split samples, which is about 7%. Other thing we like to do is, well, let's look at the intensity of that support. Maybe you got a lot of support, but it's kind of soft. In this case, it's actually fairly robust. If you took out those who are leaning yes, it really wouldn't make a huge material difference. And you see a lot of people in those dark green bars, the definitely yes category. So this is pretty strong support.
Usually you wouldn't see a higher level of support for a higher tax. Was anything asked, or were they given background about how a higher tax rate would get us closer to getting the roads fixed and ahead of schedule rather than falling behind, as I just mentioned?
Yeah, we did provide some of that information later on in the survey. At this point in the survey, the only thing they saw was those 75 words. I think the thing to keep in mind here is two things. One is the margin of error for the split sample here is 7%. So that's these differences are sort of within those margin of error, but the intensity is actually higher for the half cent in this case. So you can make, so the 45% said they definitely vote yes for a half cent versus 39% for the 3/4. So if you're taking into account the margins of error and looking at the different levels of intensity, these are basically in the same ballpark with each other and at the same level. So a short summary without wading through a whole lot of details was that majorities of all major demographic groups and geographic groups that we looked at indicated they vote yes. That includes gender, party affiliation, ethnicity, age groups, and the 2 zip codes that comprise the city here. You have majority support for these measures in all those areas. There clearly were differences in intensity. So some of them were a little more in the 50s, but a couple that were particularly strong, getting up to, my memory serves me, high 70s to low 80% support, were renters, younger women, and Democratic women. So those tend to be the most enthusiastic about a renewal measure. So now I'm going to go through a few different ways that we talked about how money could be spent from the measure and reactions to other types of information. So this, I think, 3-slide series is a variety of ways that money could be spent. We read these in random order. Some of them sound a little bit similar, and we split sampled them so respondents on the phone or those reading it online wouldn't get confused. It was just a way to basically cram more information into the survey. But we use an importance scale here. We said if this measure were to pass, how important would it be for the money to be spent in this manner? The green bars are the extremely and very important. So the dark green is extremely, the lighter green is very important, and we have summarized those on the right-hand side, and we sorted them by that. So on this first slide, we have a whole bunch of different ways the money can be spent. These were items that were all basically 4 and 5 saying extremely or very important, with pretty strong levels of intensity, and you'll see that it's repairing roads, repairing streets, repairing potholes. So a lot of those road items, top of the spending list, as well as a couple different public safety items here. Emergency response times and fire protection. Those were really some of the top spending priorities. Moving a little bit further down the list, you see a few other public safety items as well that are just basically nipping on the heels of the items in the first slide here. Some additional road repairs and storm drain repairs. So this sort of suite of items, see the intensity starting to drop a little bit here. So you're getting from the mid-80s to down to the mid-60s at the bottom of this slide. But these are all items where the first 2 slides, 2/3 of respondents thought that these were extremely or very important spending priorities to varying degrees. And on the last slide here is that you actually see a pretty precipitous drop where you see the extremely and very important actually get below the 50% threshold. Those dark brown bars are those who think it's not too important, basically. None of those are very big, so no one's dismissing these spending priorities completely out of hand. They just don't have nearly the same intensity as the items on the first couple slides. And you'll see that a few of these things here are library services, seismic repairs, and safety for bicyclists. No one's dismissing them per se, but they're just not packing nearly the emotional punch that the other items did. And so we went through and presented some information on reasons why, hey, supporting one of these measures is a great idea, some information saying, hey, this is a terrible idea. And the slides after this will show the impact of that. Just a quick summary of that. Some of the items that were sort of the most compelling reasons to vote yes, we listed here, which is the future repairs would be more expensive. We really have some of the worst streets in the county here, not some of the worst streets in the county here. The fact that there's a lot of safety issues involved with the road quality, and that I think this goes to Councilmember Chu, your point a little bit here, that the renewal would allow the acceleration of some of the road repairs. And so those were some of the most compelling reasons why someone may want to support a Measure C renewal measure. On the flip side, we went through a variety of different reasons why someone might oppose it. The fact that maybe this is not the best, the money may not be spent on the highest priority projects, the anti-tax measure concept here, the promise that Measure C was meant to be temporary, and that this could be problematic for local businesses. So, the whole lot of things and the impact of all that is on these 2 slides. We broke it out by the 2 different measures. So at the 3/4 cent level, you'll see in both of them the support did go down a little bit. Opposition went up a little bit. They both basically landed at, they started off in the higher, low 70s, high 60s range and ended up in kind of the mid 60s range. So at the 3/4 cent level, after an exchange of all this information and about the potential spending priorities, we ended up at 66% yes and 29% no. At the half-cent level, we're at 65% yes and 30% no. So basically, statistically, exactly the same, which is a little less support than our initial gut reaction from just seeing or reading those 75 words, but still well above the majority vote threshold. And so what's interesting here is that when we combine all those together and looked at whether there was a vote consistency here, because one other measure is we may see support that still stays pretty high, but it may be masking a lot of movement behind the scenes, which suggests that something may not be as viable as we might think. In this case, there was 61% of the respondents consistently indicated they vote yes. So there's not a lot of movement here back and forth. It's a fairly robust level of support for a measure. Another slide here. This was not directly related to everything necessarily, but it was we asked a question about, well, if the city wants to engage in outreach and communications with its residents here, what are some of the best ways to do that? And so this was a question we said, the city of Larkspur may provide information to you. If they were to use this particular channel of communications, how likely would you be to pay attention to that? And so the green bars are those who would say they would definitely pay attention or maybe pay attention. And so we're focusing on those. And really, interestingly enough here, the information from a friend or neighbor, the word of mouth, is the top of the list. That's not uncommon. It's particularly common in smaller communities we've seen in other research too. That's really seems to be right at the top of the list there. But also an e-newsletter from the city and then articles in your local newspaper as well. So I have a conclusion slide, and then I think your city manager was going to say a few things as well. But broadly speaking, people like living here in Larkspur. That comes as no surprise to you. They have a generally favorable opinion of city government that's been pretty consistent over the years. Road quality, as it was years ago, is maybe even now more so actually is even more so a really highly charged level of concern. People are very disgruntled about the quality of the roads here. That's not a surprise. But I think that leads to a lot of pretty robust support for renewing Measure C. And so I think that is sort of consistent with how we advised you last go around. This sets the stage for engaging a community and some more back and forth and dialogue about the best way to proceed given the results of the survey and obviously some of the financial concerns that you have going forward for paying for these road repairs.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any, or do you want to add something?
I did have some next steps to offer to the council, but it might be helpful. Let me go through those and then we can both respond.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it's very clear that, and it's even more clear than it was 5 years ago, that folks are frustrated with the quality of the roads. So this survey confirmed what we all suspect. We're still early in the process of making decisions about what goes on the ballot in November 2017, and we still have work to do to collect feedback from our community, from our civic leaders, from our stakeholders, and just from folks on the street. And so that's where your staff will be focusing its energies for you over the next several weeks and months, is to collect that information to help inform you. I think one of the most significant things that you saw in the survey is the word of mouth issue, that folks really want to talk about these things with their neighbors. I agree with Kurt, it's a small town thing, but it's also, we're a town where folks are gone all day. A lot of our community goes to work somewhere else, and so they come back and they catch up on community issues by talking to each other. So I think one of the things that we'd like to do that's a little different from 4 years ago when we were dealing with Measure C is commit some staff resource and time to getting out into the neighborhoods at neighborhood level meetings to answer questions about what Measure C's done over the last 4 years, and the potential things that Measure C might do in the future, particularly about these topics that come up time and again, road conditions and potholes. And you know, I always hold my breath to volunteer folks to join me in committing a lot of time, but I know he's already answered yes, partly because I twisted his arm. But Julian Skinner, the Public Works Director, and I are going to start a road show to get out in the neighborhoods and really talk about what Measure C's done and what Measure C renewal could mean for the future. I think it'd be great to tap all 5 of you and your energy and your connections within your neighborhoods. So certainly we would anticipate doing that. And of course, a lot of sit-downs with stakeholders. We did quite a bit of this sort of education of the community before, but the difference now is we have a track record to talk about. And it's good and bad. We've talked about this. We have a track record to say we did what we promised. We spent the money the way we promised we would, and we've made progress. But we've also had folks say, why did the pavement stop right before my street? And that's a conversation we need to get out in the community and have. I've written a lot of emails. I've talked to a lot of folks on the phone about that. But nothing beats face-to-face contact. So that's where I anticipate staff offering up its resources for education and where the council, I know, will be putting a lot of its energy this year.
And I'm sure that's true. So, any questions from council members? Councilmember Morrison? Okay, Councilmember Webb?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
presentation.
You. I actually had one question. It's just out of curiosity. So, this measure would go on the ballot in November. Are there other anticipated tax measures that may be on the ballot at the same time? Or bond measures?
I'm not aware of any in Marin County that are scheduled for this ballot.
Okay. Because the question I was going to ask is, if there were anticipated to be some, would there be questions that could be asked in a survey that would elicit some information about whether you'd be more or less likely to vote for this measure, depending on whether there was a school measure on the ballot or College of Marin or hospital or whatever else it might be?
Well, I can speak to that. The school districts, as you'll recall, when in 2011, asked us not to put a sales tax measure on a ballot against one of their parcel taxes or bonds, and they've reciprocated. They reciprocated when we put Measure C on the ballot, and they are reciprocating now. So there won't be.
So those are the schools, and there's nobody else lurking in the background that we know of.
Well, I won't use the word lurking, but nobody's told me that they're planning on putting measures.
I mean, it wasn't really a question to elicit a lot of information. It's just more of a question about whether that would be a useful survey question.
There's ways to test that in surveys. Frankly, it can be a little bit challenging because the way voters tend to approach these things is historically we've seen, and if you looked at the last election, there were a lot of items that passed in a lot of communities where it had lots of ballot measures on at the same time. They tend to look at them as isolated and say, is there a need for this? Will I vote yes or no on it? Do I trust the money will be spent appropriately?
Right.
And particularly if it's apples to oranges or even a bond versus a sales tax, these are kind of tougher things to compare.
Yeah. I asked the question only because there's certainly a segment of our community that is increasingly vocal about the accumulation of local taxes.
Sure.
And I'd hate to be caught up in that, so I was just wondering if there's some way to test that, or if it's even necessary, and maybe sounds like it's not. Okay, that was my only question. Yeah.
I like the roadshow idea, and I'd love to help, if we have a schedule for those, participate and show up and help with that. And I know Julian is a very articulate speaker for these public works matters. That's what I've heard. When do you think that should happen, in the summer or?
Oh, I think
as soon as possible.
Julian and I are going to start looking at dates right away. So as soon as we can get on neighborhood groups' calendars, we will let council members know.
Yeah, I also would just encourage as an idea, already existing groups like the Larkspur Walkers, I've spoken to them before, and there'll be 75 people standing there listening. They're already meeting, and so come up with those, and the Tamalpais is another really good location for that. That's already existing, so.
Any more questions from the council? So we'll send it to the public. Are there any questions from members of the public here this evening? Seeing none, we will return it to the council, although I don't know this is really an action item.
It's not, it's information for you.
Okay, so are there any further comments or questions from the council members? If that is the case, then we will close this item, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned.